Bran Stark had never felt so keenly the weight of centuries as he did in that half-lit moment when the voices of the weirwood whispered tales older than the wall itself. Beneath his fingertips, the carved face of the tree seemed to breathe with a spirit of winter. He felt the thousand eyes of history, green eyes and brown eyes and blue eyes, trained upon him as the wind sighed through the white branches. Overhead, ravens circled in lazy arcs, watchful, anticipating. The powers of the three-eyed raven were woven through every fiber of Bran's being now, more truth than gift, and he understood with a chilly clarity that what he did next would echo across every realm. The Lannisters had lied, from father to son, mother to daughter, as surely as the snows fell each year. And in those lies, the realm had bled. Perhaps it was time for all those threads to be unwoven. Perhaps it was time to let the truth roar into every ear like the cry of a dire wolf, unstoppable and full of the old magic. Bran drew a breath so slow it seemed to stretch the dusk around him. The open courtyard of Winterfell lay beyond the godwood, a patch of pale, rutted snow cut by footprints from countless boots. He could sense ghosts prowling somewhere near the gates, sniffing for any sign of danger. Arya was at practice, quick as a shadow, crossing swords with her sparring partner. Sansa busied herself within the Great Keep, forging alliances with lords and ladies who had come north out of gratitude and necessity. And Jon, where was Jon? In the crypts, perhaps, or consulting with the northern bannermen in the Great Hall, seeking some way to secure the alliance of the living. Time itself had grown so precarious. War was never truly done even when crowns changed hands. There would always be old feuds, cunning whispers, wounds unhealed. Yet there was a hush upon Winterfell, a sense that life was returning to its rightful shape, like a tapestry rehung after being battered by wind and war. But in Bran, new storms had begun to gather. The knowledge he held in his mind was no idle secret, no trifling rumor or mild scandal. He knew the shape of Jaime Lannister's sins as if a ghost had carved them into his memory. He knew the fullness of Cersei's ambition and the cunning behind her every move. He knew the cruelty that Tywin had sown, from the sack of King's Landing to the forging of alliances meant to crush the innocent underfoot. Each vision that came to Bran unfolded like a tapestry burned at the edges, exposing the raw, unspeakable truth behind their house. And these truths pulsed within him, pressing against the fragile boundaries of his humanity, demanding release. He stared up at the reddening sky through the weirwood's bone-white branches. The faces carved into the bark still unsettled him at times, a reflection of some cosmic sadness. But he had learned to accept them as one accepts the passing of seasons. With that acceptance came a question he had been unable to cast aside. Did he have the right, no, the obligation, to pull back the veil that shielded the Lannisters and their well-kept deceptions? Would it truly serve the realm, or would it plunge everything into chaos once more? From the corner of his consciousness, he felt Mira Reed's absence. She had gone home to Greywater Watch, never quite able to reconcile herself to the strange metamorphosis of the boy she had once protected and carried on her back. Bran was not that boy anymore. The Greenseer in him had grown, overshadowing the simpler joys of youth. Sometimes, late at night, he still yearned for the days when he could dream of being a knight. But the old magic had its own demands, and it had brought him this far for a reason. In the yard, he heard metal clash against metal, then the echo of a triumphant cry. Arya, no doubt besting an opponent twice her size. She had always done the impossible, unflinching and quick as a blade. Bran closed his eyes, letting his consciousness drift. He felt the wind swirl around him, and he sank deeper into the quiet place within himself, the place where ravens soared across skies filled with ancient secrets. And in that darkness he saw images. The Iron Throne glimmering with the last rays of dying daylight. Cersei's narrowed eyes full of calculation. Tyrion bent in thought, speaking words that could shape worlds. Jaime torn by regret and love, standing on the battlements of some distant castle. Then, deeper still, Tywin, arms folded across his chest, forging strategies behind cold eyes. Red kept staining Bran's visions. Red, like rubies tumbling from a wounded king's crown. Red like the blood spilled at the twins, red like the scorching of King's Landing. So much pain, so many lies. When he opened his eyes again, the world felt sharper. He knew with an unerring certainty that it was time. The realm had survived betrayal after betrayal, petty feuds and grave betrayals alike. Winter had come and gone, leaving devastation. But in the aftermath, the Starks were rising again. Bran, Sansa, Arya, and even Jon, the family scattered to the winds, had coalesced once more in Winterfell. Their rightful seat, their sanctuary, and now the seat of knowledge beyond mortal understanding. If there was ever a moment to hold the Lannisters accountable for their darkest secrets, it was now, while the wounds of war were fresh, while the realm was teetering between new alliances and old grudges, uncertain of its future. He began the subtle weaving of magic, letting it course through him like a slow, thick river. The weirwood seemed to resonate with him, sharing its ancient power. In that trance-like state, Bran extended his thoughts, searching for those who should hear the truth. The weirwood network pulsed across the continent, connecting every heart tree from Dorne to the frozen shores of the north. Through it, he could speak in dreams or cast illusions, peel away the illusions men wore like armor, and let them see what truly happened in the dim corridors of the past. He had done so in small measures to nudge events or reveal small truths. But never like this. This would be a flood, not a trickle. If he loosed it all at once, if he pulled apart the tapestry, there would be no going back. As the magic built within him, a flutter of fear brushed his heart. He remembered what Bloodraven had told him in one of his final teachings: the past is already written, the ink dry. But the eyes that read it hold the power to shape tomorrow. Perhaps that was all the permission Bran needed. Perhaps it was also a warning. Either way, he let his heart fill with resolve. The Lannisters were formidable. Cersei's cunning, Jaime's conflicted honor, Tyrion's intellect, and the monstrous shadows of their father's legacy, they would not yield easily to truth. But if the truth was revealed not by rumor, but by something greater, something none could deny, then House Lannister would have to face the reckoning they had sown. The vision rushed forward. First, he focused on King's Landing, that colossal pit of intrigue and cruelty. Though it was no longer Cersei's seat, she had fled or been removed, rumors clashed in his mind, enough of the Lannisters' hold remained there. Lords and ladies in the capital would dream of terrible shapes in the night, see glimpses of the old King Aerys in his madness, the forging of the false story that had crowned Robert Baratheon and overshadowed the uglier truths of the sack. In the Great Hall, they would see illusions of Tywin's monstrous cunning, of Gregor Clegane carrying out the butchery that forever stained the Lion's sigil. Every lie, every betrayal laid bare in haunting clarity. Then, further west, in the stronghold of Casterly Rock, the seat of House Lannister, the red walls and gilded halls would reverberate with ghosts. Servants and lords alike would see, in their quiet hours, the hidden truths behind the war they had stoked, the gold they had used to choke the realm, the hidden paternity that had shaped destinies. Those illusions might arrive in the darkness, flickering across the corners of candlelit chambers, or come as nightmares. Perhaps Jaime, if he were there, would see again that moment he'd chosen to shove Bran from the tower. 1,000 intricacies that had tangled the realm in misfortune for so long would unravel in a single, unstoppable wave. In the north, though, the truth would be different. It would be quieter. A more measured revelation. Bran did not want to traumatize his family with an onslaught of dark visions. They'd endured enough pain. Instead, he would let them learn piece by piece in a manner that made sense, that let them question rather than drown in horror. Truth was a double-edged sword. Sometimes it could unite, but sometimes it tore apart that which was already fragile. His vision swelled and the sky seemed to spin. He could feel the presence of other minds pressing back at him, like the distant brush of a curious child or the suspicious glare of a wild creature. Magic was a living thing, and it was never wielded without consequence. Gradually, he relaxed his hold, letting the revelations seep into the realm's consciousness. He did not fling the door open all at once. Instead, he cracked it, letting the wind blow in. He trusted the timing to forces older than men. The truth, once set in motion, would find its own path. When Bran finally emerged from his trance, the godwood was cloaked in moonlight. The hush seemed profound, and yet the wind hissed through the branches with the faintest hint of a whisper: "You have done it." There was no triumphant fanfare, no immediate sign of cosmic approval or condemnation. Simply the quiet of Winterfell, which felt as it had for thousands of years, eternal and unflinching in the face of human endeavor. Yet Bran sensed an undercurrent, a shift in the tapestry of fate. The pieces had begun to move. A raven flapped down beside him, its beady eye assessing him curiously. Bran reached out and it pecked gently at his fingertip as though acknowledging the bond they shared. "The truth is a tricky beast," Bran murmured, his voice low, subdued by the night. "But it must come, even if we are not ready." The raven croaked as if in agreement, then hopped onto the weirwood root, gazing at Bran expectantly. The second wave of fear rose in Bran's chest. Would the revelations unite the realm in common cause or shatter whatever precarious peace remained? He could not see all the consequences, for the future was never fixed. He was the three-eyed raven, not a perfect oracle. He saw threads and shapes, potentialities, flickers of might-be and has-been. It frightened him in some small corner of his soul that remained a boy. Still, he steadied his breathing. The path was chosen. All he could do now was bear witness and guide it as best he could. Morning came bright and cold. The courtyard bustled with life, stable hands leading horses to water, soldiers cleaning weapons, a traveling merchant showing off bright ribbons and colored dyes. Winterfell's gates had become a hub for many travelers seeking audience with the Starks, who once again held the north in a gentle but firm grip. From his vantage point by a window in one of the castle's towers, Bran watched the swirl of activity as if through a dream. Each face, each gesture, each voice, he could slip into their hearts if he chose, but he did not. The time for secrets was passing, the time for revelation was at hand. He sensed that the dreams had already begun to trickle into the minds of those far away. No announcements rang through Winterfell that morning. No ravens had arrived with letters from King's Landing, nor had any envoy stormed the yard. Life carried on as usual, at least for the moment. But by midday, a rider approached. A banner depicting a golden lion flapped over the messenger's shoulder, though somewhat tattered. The man's face was pale, drawn, his expression haunted. He begged an immediate audience with Lord Stark, or what stood for the Lord in these uncertain days. Sansa received him in the great hall, with Arya by her side and Bran observing from his cushioned seat. Jon was away on some matter concerning the remaining wildlings. The rider's hair was disheveled, and he looked as though he had spent the night warding off nightmares. Even the horses in the courtyard had seemed uneasy upon his arrival, stamping the ground and tossing their heads. "You have come far," Sansa said, her voice carrying the gentle echo of courtesy. "Be welcome, though you carry the lion's sigil. What news from your lord or lady?" My lady, my lord," the messenger's eyes flicked to Bran, unsure what title to use. Then he settled on Sansa, who radiated authority in the north. "I come from Casterly Rock, bearing words of a most alarming nature. Something unnatural has been happening. The nights bring visions. Not just dreams, but visions so real it is as if we are watching the dead walk among us. The people speak of madness in King's Landing, illusions of crows and blood. They say the name Stark in hushed tones, as though House Stark conjures these apparitions." Arya smiled without warmth, her gray eyes sharp. "Visions? Of what exactly?" The messenger swallowed, clearly spooked. "Confessions, my lady. They see Lord Tywin's war council. They see the moment your father was arrested, the plotting behind it, the manipulations that fueled the war against your house. They see Prince Rhaegar's children slain in the Red Keep." His voice faltered as though the words themselves might turn to ghosts before him. He looked down. "Many grow fearful. There are rumors that House Lannister is cursed, that some old magic has come to punish them for their deeds. Some have begun to speak of retribution, even revolution. They demand answers." Arya's jaw clenched, and Bran saw her knuckles tighten on the hilt of the small dagger she kept at her waist. Sansa's face, though, remained carefully composed, her eyes flickering with an unreadable mix of emotions. She looked at Bran, who inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the unspoken question. "Did you do this?" Sansa then turned her attention back to the messenger. "And who is it that rules at Casterly Rock now? Is Jaime Lannister there? Or Tyrion?" "Neither, my lady. Ser Jaime is rumored to be traveling, though none can say where he's gone. Lord Tyrion, it is said he remains the hand of Daenerys Targaryen, forging peace in the south. So the seat falls to a cousin of lesser name who struggles to maintain control." He paused, licking his lips. "The people whisper that if the nightmares do not cease, there will be rebellion in the west." The great hall fell silent except for the crackle of the hearth. Bran felt the weight of every eye upon him. He knew that if Sansa pressed him, he would not lie. But how to explain that this was no simple act of vengeance? That it was an attempt to free the realm from the poisonous tangles of deception woven by House Lannister for decades? When Bran finally spoke, his voice was calm, though it reverberated with a strange note that hadn't been there before his transformation. "The realm is seeing the truth," he said, allowing no ambiguity. "The illusions are born from what has already passed. The lies that were told are now undone." A ripple of discomfort rolled through the hall's inhabitants. Some glanced at one another, uncertain whether they should be relieved or horrified. The Lannister messenger's eyes went wide, a hint of fear flashing in them. "Then it is your doing?" he asked, voice trembling slightly. "You have cursed us?" Bran shook his head. "It is not a curse. It is simply the truth." Arya gave a soft snort, her expression wry. "The truth can be more frightening than any curse, especially for those who tried so hard to hide it." She glanced at the messenger pointedly, and he looked down. For a moment, there was no sound but the soft rush of cold wind creeping in from the cracks in the hall's doors. Then Sansa spoke, her voice measured and regal. "You have traveled far to deliver this message. Stay, rest. We will give you what hospitality Winterfell can offer. Then you can return to your masters and tell them what you have learned. That the North does not wage war lightly, but neither will it stand by while old lies continue to poison the realm. Let them make of that what they will." The messenger bowed, relief and unease mingling on his face. Servants led him away, and the large doors of the great hall closed behind him, leaving Bran, Arya, and Sansa in tense quiet. Sansa stood, smoothing the folds of her cloak. "Walk with me," she said, and started toward the side door that led to a smaller corridor. Arya and Bran followed, silent. The corridor was lit by narrow windows, the late morning sun glinting off the ancient stones. They moved slowly to accommodate Bran's chair, Arya pushing him along. Sansa remained just ahead, her posture rigid. At last, she halted near a window and turned to face Bran. "I suspected this was your doing," she began, her tone betraying neither anger nor approval. "The question is why?" Arya placed a hand on Bran's shoulder. "I'd like to know that too," she said softly. "This is big, bigger than I ever thought possible. We always knew you had certain powers, but Bran, you've started something that can't be undone." Bran allowed a moment of silence before he answered, his gaze drifting to the rimed glass of the window. "I've seen more than I can bear. Secrets that twisted everything from Robert's rebellion to the Red Wedding. So many lives lost under a tapestry of deceit. Tywin Lannister orchestrated half of it, Cersei contributed her share, and Jaime played his part, even if he regrets it now. They've hidden behind half-truths and illusions of power. It felt wrong to allow those lies to remain buried. The realm deserves to know, and now it does." Sansa's eyes glimmered with something akin to sorrow. "Truth alone won't be enough to heal the wounds. Sometimes it can rip them open wider." Arya nodded slowly. "And you must realize how the Lannisters will react. They won't simply accept condemnation. If they feel cornered, they may strike first." Bran sighed. "Yes, they may. But sometimes you must tear out the infection before the wound can truly heal, even if it is painful." Arya exchanged a glance with Sansa. The corridor was quiet, the hush broken only by the distant sound of boots on stone from the floor below. At length, Sansa placed her hand on the cold window ledge. "We'll need to be ready then. Ready for the chaos that's coming. Because I can promise you there will be chaos." Her voice softened. "But you're my brother, and this is our home. Whatever you set in motion, we will face it together." Bran felt a wave of relief. He knew how precarious this was, but the sense of isolation he had feared did not come. Arya and Sansa were with him. They were stark bound by blood and the hardships they had endured. The winter winds might blow, but the pack would endure. In the days that followed, ravens arrived in a flurry of black wings. Letters from across the 7 kingdoms poured into Winterfell, each more urgent than the last. Some demanded explanations, others begged for Bran to cease his conjurations. There were pleas from small folk who had lost all faith in their Lannister lords, detailing nightmares and strange apparitions. A few letters, carefully phrased, hinted that certain lords might be willing to revolt against the Lannister name if given the right support. Fear was spreading, but so was a sense of grim hope. At last, the illusions were forced to recede before the bright blade of honesty. Or so it seemed. Not all the letters were directed to Bran, of course. Sansa received offers of alliances, many from lords who despised the Lannisters. Ut had never dared speak out. Arya, surprisingly, drew requests from far-flung corners, with small knights or even merchants asking for her sword to protect them from potential retaliation. Some presumed she was a fabled warrior touched by magic, which was half-true in its own way. The North, it seemed, was becoming a beacon of retribution. But as Sansa had warned, with retribution came danger. More than one raven bore threats, unsubtle ones penned in trembling script, proclaiming that if House Stark did not cease this sorcery, the lions would bare their claws. One note arrived bearing the stamp of Lannister gold, though not from Jaime or Tyrion, some cousin or steward, desperate to halt the unraveling. He demanded an audience, threatened war, insisted on restitution for the slander he claimed was being spread. Winterfell read these with calm scrutiny, never replying in haste. Each was carefully logged, stowed away. The North would not be intimidated. One evening, as the chill deepened and the skies spat a thin layer of snow, Jaime Lannister himself arrived at Winterfell's gates. He came without fanfare, dressed in plain leathers and a heavy cloak, a single squire riding with him. The guards recognized his face and word spread quickly through the castle. By the time Jaime dismounted in the courtyard, Sansa was there to greet him, flanked by Arya with half a dozen Stark guards at her back. Jaime bowed, his eyes solemn. There was no trace of arrogance or swagger left in him. The North had changed him, as had the wars and perhaps regret. "Lady Stark," he said quietly, "I come seeking an audience with your brother." His eyes flicked to Arya. "With your family." "Sir Jaime," Sansa replied, tone carefully polite. "You are welcome to Winterfell, though I'd ask your intentions." He took a breath that plumed in the cold air. "I come in peace. I have no illusions about how I'm viewed here." He shifted, glancing around at the watchers who bristled with hostility. "But the realm is on the brink again, and it seems your brother has torn open every wound House Lannister ever inflicted. If that was his aim, it's working. I need to speak with him." Sansa regarded him for a moment before nodding. "Very well. You shall have an audience." She directed one of the guards. "Take Sir Jaime to the Great Hall. Offer his squire a place to warm himself." Then she turned back to Jaime. "I trust you'll respect our hospitality. Should you forget, my sister has an excellent memory for debts." Arya's expression remained cold, but she gave the slightest tilt of her head, acknowledging Sansa's words. Jaime followed in silence, his golden hand gleaming in the waning light. He seemed a shadow of the man who had once worn gleaming armor and boasted of killing kings. There was a pensiveness in his gaze that hinted at a long internal war, a wrestling with guilt, duty, and the knowledge that time was no longer his ally. Bran was in the solar, near a fireplace, a blanket draped over his legs, when Sansa and Arya led Jaime to him. The tension in the room was thick enough to slice. Jaime halted before Bran's chair, his gaze dipping to the floor for a moment. He swallowed, as if summoning courage. "Bran," he said, using the boy's name, though a hush followed the familiarity. "Or should I say Lord Stark? Or something else entirely?" Bran studied the man who had once tried to kill him, who had lost his sword hand and then part of his identity in the years since. Jaime's hair was streaked with silver at the temples, his eyes rimmed by lines of regret. "Bran is fine," the young Stark replied at last, voice even. "Why have you come, Sir Jaime?" Jaime exhaled. "To understand. The nightmares, the visions. Everyone is speaking of them. They see everything my house did, and I'm not saying we are innocent. The Lannisters have spilt blood and told lies. But your power, is it your will that the entire realm be consumed by these illusions?" "Yes," Bran answered softly, "because no house should be able to hide such atrocities behind gold and fear. When the realm learns the truth, perhaps they can finally move forward without the weight of those lies." Jaime's face tightened. "You must know the chaos you're causing. Villages in the Westerlands are on the verge of revolt. My sister's last supporters threaten to lash out in desperation. And he paused, his voice trembling slightly, "I must live every day reliving my choices. Not that I haven't already, but now they haunt my dreams as if they're freshly carved into my mind." Sansa regarded Jaime with a level stare. "Is that not just? Justice is not always gentle, Sir Jaime." "No," he admitted, "but the realm is fragile. We've barely recovered from one war, and there are still threats, hidden or biding their time. If we tear each other apart now, what hope is left?" He glanced at Bran, a flicker of pain in his eyes. "This truth you share, it might be cleansing, or it might spark a new war that dwarfs the last one." Bran did not waver. "A war built on lies is no peace at all, Jaime. Maybe the realm needs a reckoning. Maybe it's the only way to finally break the cycle." A quiet settled, as though the castle itself held its breath. Jaime looked past Bran's shoulder to the fire, the flickering light dancing on his features. "I once pushed you from a tower because I was afraid of what truth you might speak," he said, voice low and haunted. "That single act, it changed everything. If I hadn't, maybe my house wouldn't be in this position. Maybe you wouldn't be as you are, and I wouldn't have lost my hand or my honor or my illusions. But it's done. And you stand here 1,000 times more powerful than you were that day." Arya's hand lingered near her dagger. She had not forgotten her own list, though Jaime's name had faded from it over time. Still, she looked ready to defend Bran from any threat. Jaime continued, turning back to them. "I've loved Cersei too long, and that love blinded me. I killed for her, lied for her. I'm no innocent. But she is lost now, her illusions twist her mind, and I can't stand by her side anymore. His voice cracked. House Lannister. I don't even know if it can be saved. But I'm here to ask, is there another way? Can we let the realm know these truths without letting it devour itself in vengeance? Bran heard the sincerity laced with desperation. He knew Jaime had changed, perhaps not fully redeemed, but at least awakened to the monstrous cost of his past. That depends on your house, Bran answered finally. If they accept the truth, if they pay the debts they owe, perhaps. But if they lash out, if they spill more blood in an attempt to bury these revelations, then there will be no path but destruction. A wry, humorless smile curved Jaime's lips. I suppose that's fair. How can I persuade them? My father is dead, his legacy is the gold and fear he left behind. My sister is a viper in the shadows, and I doubt she'll come seeking your forgiveness. Tyrion, he might have the influence to calm the waters, but the realm sees him as a traitor or a demon spawn. Do you expect us to unite under some banner of penance? Sansa and Arya listened in tense silence. At length, Sansa said quietly, atonement is not a single act, but a series of choices. The Lannisters have seldom chosen atonement. If you would have peace, you must lead them down that path. Convince them to accept responsibility. How? Jaime asked. When the illusions strike fear into them each night, they cling tighter to their arrogance. Bran's voice was a faint whisper of power, like a cold wind that found every crack. Show them you accept the truth of what they did. Let the West see their leaders bend the knee to justice, pledge restitution to those who suffered. Stop trying to cling to the illusions of the old order. If House Lannister can do that, if you can stand before the realm and confess, then perhaps the illusions will transform. They won't vanish, but they can become lessons instead of nightmares. Jaime laughed bitterly. A public confession from Lannisters. That might be the hardest battle of all. Sansa regarded him, her expression softening. You have a chance to prove the sincerity of your words. Decide if House Lannister can stand for truth or if it must die under the weight of its own lies. With that, the meeting ended. Jaime was given a modest chamber near the top of a tower, not quite a prisoner, not quite a guest of honor. He walked Winterfell's corridors like a penitent ghost. Occasionally, soldiers spat at his feet or glared with unveiled loathing. But he endured it in silence, as though every insult was part of the penance he knew he owed. At night, Bran's power stretched across the land, weaving dreams and revelations. The new shape of those illusions flickered in his mind. He watched as men and women beheld Tywin Lannister's cruelties, as they saw the duplicity behind Joffrey's ascension, the cruelty visited upon Sansa in King's Landing. In the halls of the Rock, lords tossed awake in terror, confronted by the images of war that Tywin had orchestrated, the reigns of Castamere, the brutal legacy of House Rain. Villagers huddled by the hearth, praying for dawn to banish the nightmares. Some even prayed to the old gods of the north, believing the wrath of the weirwoods had come upon them. But with each day, more letters arrived, some from western lords who despised what they now fully understood. The lion's roar was turning into a whimper in the face of truth's fury. At the same time, the illusions were no longer simple condemnation. For some hearts, Bran felt pity. Tyrion's burdens weighed heavily in each vision, revealing his attempts to mitigate the damage, his forced complicity in some sins he never wished to commit. For Jaime, the visions offered glimpses of the man he could have been had he chosen differently. For those who had done dark deeds unwittingly, the illusions showed the forks in the road they had passed. Perhaps, in understanding, there might be the smallest glimmer of redemption. It was a delicate, perilous dance, guided by Bran's power but also shaped by the hearts of those who dreamed. In Winterfell's courtyard, Arya and Jaime occasionally crossed paths. She watched him with hawk-like intensity, as if expecting treachery at any moment. But as the days passed, tension eased fractionally. They never became friends, too much blood stood between them, but they found a kind of uneasy respect. She saw that he no longer carried himself with the carefree swagger of a Lannister golden boy. He was a man worn by truths, by regrets. She could at least appreciate honesty when she saw it. On the 5th day after Jaime's arrival, a sudden flurry of horns announced an unexpected visitor. The gates swung open to reveal a column of riders bearing the Targaryen sigil, a black banner with a 3-headed red dragon. At their head rode Tyrion Lannister, cloaked in fur, his mismatched eyes scanning the fortress. His face bore exhaustion and worry, but also a determination that rivaled the winter winds. At his side were several unsullied, stoic statues. Behind them, a handful of knights from the Vale, proof, perhaps, that alliances had twisted in surprising ways. When Tyrion dismounted, he flicked his gaze around the courtyard. The biting cold made his cheeks ruddy, and his breath formed small clouds. At once, the watchers moved to gather. Sansa and Arya stepped forward. Bran was summoned with haste. Jaime emerged from the inner yard, surprise etched on his face. Tyrion took in the sight of his brother, managed a tight smile, and then bowed to the Stark sisters. Apologies for arriving unannounced, Tyrion began, his tone smooth but weighted. We have urgent business and ravens can be intercepted. I needed to come in person. Sansa inclined her head. Lord Tyrion, your presence is unexpected. What brings the Queen's hand to Winterfell in such haste? Tyrion sighed, glancing around at the gathered throng. Shall we speak privately? A few minutes later, they were ensconced in the same solar where Jaime had pled his case. Bran watched Tyrion closely, while Arya stationed herself by the door, watchful and silent as a direwolf. Jaime stood near the fire, arms folded, as though bracing himself. Sansa took her seat, gesturing for Tyrion to speak. He began without preamble. The illusions have spread across the realm, King's Landing, the Westerlands, even parts of the Reach and the Riverlands. Every Lannister sin is on display each night. My queen, Daenerys, has tried to quell the panic in the Crownlands, but the common folk are unsettled. They see images of Targaryen tragedies too, though not so prominently. Mostly, the illusions revolve around Lannister treachery. He glanced at Bran. Rumor says you are the cause. I suspect the rumor is true. Bran inclined his head. It is. The realm must know. Tyrion pursed his lips. Must they? I won't deny that House Lannister bears immense guilt. I've suffered it myself. But the manner in which these revelations appear is driving many to madness. There's talk of uproar, of vengeance, of toppling what remains of the Lannister name by violent means. The Queen does not desire more bloodshed. Not now, after all that has happened. We want to avoid plunging the realm back into chaos. And yet, Arya said quietly, chaos may be the price that must be paid. Tyrion's gaze flicked to her. Spoken like someone who has known injustice intimately. I do not doubt your right to your anger, but you must see the bigger picture as well. A realm once again embroiled in war could cost tens of thousands more lives. Bran's voice was cool as northern steel. I have not forced a sword into anyone's hand. The illusions only reveal truth. If men choose war because they cannot bear their own guilt, it is their choice. Tyrion exhaled heavily. Fair enough. Still, I come with a proposition. The Queen suggests a formal gathering of the great houses, an open council, where these truths can be addressed openly and judged by all, nobles and small folk alike. Let each house speak for its sins and accept what judgment the realm deems fit. If the illusions persist, let them guide us to reparation, not annihilation. We can discuss how best to rebuild trust. The Targaryen banner, in alliance with House Stark, can ensure safe conduct for Lannister representatives. We would lay our cards on the table in front of all. Sansa's eyebrows rose. A grand assembly, reminiscent of the great council of old? Precisely, Tyrion said. One that deals not with choosing a king, but with confronting the past. A council of truth, if you will. Let it be known that those who refuse to attend choose secrecy and guilt over absolution. If your illusions are unstoppable, we might at least guide how the realm interprets them. Silence followed as they all weighed the suggestion. Jaime stared at the fire, eyes distant, as though imagining the spectacle House Lannister dragged before a tribunal of the entire kingdom. Arya's posture remained rigid, her lips pressed together. Sansa drummed her fingertips on the arm of her chair, thinking. Bran sensed the potential in Tyrion's idea. A controlled, collective confrontation of the truth might spare countless lives. After a long pause, Sansa spoke. This council, where would it be held? And who would preside? Tyrion cleared his throat. Ideally, somewhere neutral. Harrenhal is often cited, but it's a cursed place. The Dragonette in King's Landing is still in ruins, though it could be made presentable. The Queen would volunteer King's Landing, but I fear many would see that as a trap. Perhaps Riverrun or Mo Kalen, though the latter is in dire condition. We'll need to discuss a location all parties can accept. As for who would preside, the Queen and you, Lady Stark, along with a representative of the faith, perhaps? And maybe a Dornish prince or the Lady of the Vale to ensure balance. We'd invite all the great lords, Tarleys, Greyjoys, Tyrell claimants, what remains of the Baratheon line, the Arryns, the Martells, the Lannisters themselves. We do this openly or not at all. Sansa considered. It is a bold plan. We risk drawing all the powers together in one place, which could lead to complications. True, Tyrion admitted. A better one potential battleground where we can manage the peace than a dozen smaller uprisings across the land. Arya spoke up then, her voice quiet but piercing. If we do this, then House Lannister must come. With heads bared. No armies waiting to pounce. If we sense any betrayal. Jaime nodded, meeting her gaze. I understand. Betrayal would doom us anyway. I'll do what I can to convince whatever remains of our house to attend. He turned to Tyrion, exhaling. We stand on a precipice, little brother. And it's our father's legacy that led us here. Tyrion's mismatched eyes shimmered with something akin to sorrow. So be it. I'd rather face the illusions head-on than continue to let them plague the realm in shadows. Finally, all eyes shifted to Bran. Even Sansa, the Lady of Winterfell, deferred to him on this matter, for he held the power that had set these events in motion. Bran closed his eyes for a moment, letting the weight of it settle. He knew the illusions would continue regardless, but if there was a chance for the realm to confront the truth in a way that might foster some measure of peace, he owed it to everyone to try. Let it be so, he said softly. I will not halt the illusions, but if the great houses gather, if they acknowledge the truth and vow to seek a just course, it might ease the nightmares. The Weirwoods are not petty, nor am I. The truth is not meant as eternal punishment, but as a reckoning that can lead to something better. Relief flickered across Tyrion's face. Sansa nodded and Arya let out a slow breath. In that moment, the first step toward the Council of Truth was taken. Letters would need to be sent, arrangements made, and agreement upon a location hammered out. It would be a challenge like no other, bringing together a war-torn kingdom to confess its sins. But it was a path and better than the blind stumbling into rage and revenge that had been looming. In the weeks that followed, a flurry of ravens coursed across the Seven Kingdoms. Messages sealed with the Stark dire wolf, the Targaryen dragon, and occasionally the Lannister lion, carried by Tyrion and Jaime, spread the word of a grand gathering, a day of reckoning for past crimes, with the promise of forging a future free of hidden poisons. Some scoffed at the idea, sure that no house would willingly expose itself to condemnation. Others, however, saw in it a chance to either humiliate enemies or find closure for old wounds. Eager or reluctant, they agreed, this was a summons they could not ignore. Harrenhal was deemed too ominous. Mo Kalen was too ruined. In the end, Riverrun offered the best compromise, central enough for all to reach, large enough to host a grand council, and with the Tullus bearing enough neutrality despite their ties to House Stark to not immediately terrify the lion or the dragon. Restoring the castle for such a gathering became a monumental task, but the Tully bannermen worked tirelessly. Daenerys Targaryen, though suspicious of the location, assented, provided her forces could stand guard to prevent treachery. And so it began, an exodus of lords, ladies, knights, and servants from all corners of Westeros converging on the banks of the Red Fork. Though he loathed travel, Bran insisted on going. With the help of a special wheelhouse designed for him, he journeyed south for the first time since his flight from Winterfell all those years before. By his side rode Sansa, Arya, and a contingent of northern soldiers sworn to House Stark. Ghost trotted at a distance, occasionally glimpsed by travelers, a pale reminder of the Stark's savage loyalty. Jon was invited, but his duties in the north weighed heavily on him. He promised to come if he could, but the unrest along the wall demanded his presence. So the small party of Starks pressed on, eventually arriving at Riverrun's imposing walls under gray, drizzling skies. There, a sight to behold, banners representing nearly every great house fluttered in the courtyard. The red on gold of the Lannisters, the golden roses of Tyrell, though the main line was gone, a distant cousin now claimed the name, the burning stag of the Baratheons, again, tenuously claimed by Gendry Baratheon, legitimized by royal decree. The sun and spear of Dorne, the moon and falcon of the Vale, the trout of Tully, even the flayed man of the new Boltons who had survived the purges, though very few in number and forced to kneel quickly in supplication. Added to these were the Greyjoy Kraken, the Golden Lion of the Westerland's lesser lords, and a host of minor houses. And, of course, the Targaryen dragon soared above them all, a reminder that Daenerys' claim to the throne was still recognized in many hearts, even if her rule was contested in places that had not yet mended from the fires of dragons. Tyrion and Jaime had arrived earlier, presumably working to calm the Lannister retinues and ensure no one did anything foolish. Daenerys herself was expected within days, riding from King's Landing with the Unsullied. The stage was set for a gathering that might well decide the fate of the Seven Kingdoms. Bran felt the hum of tension through the air like a current. He also sensed the wave of illusions continuing each night, inevitable, unstoppable, revealing piece by piece the betrayals, murders, and secrets. The entire realm was on edge, as though a single spark could ignite a massive conflagration. Yet here, under the watchful walls of Riverrun, a possibility existed that a structured confrontation of the truth might avert anarchy. The High Lord's Solar had been converted into a planning chamber for the event. There, Sansa, Arya, Tyrion, Jaime, and several Tully lords gathered to make final preparations. Seating arrangements, security protocols, speaking order, endless details that threatened to unravel. Tempers flared. Lord Baratheon insisted on presenting his grievances first, while the Tyrell cousin wanted assurances that no mention of the war crimes in Highgarden would overshadow her claim. The Martells, though few, demanded recognition for the murder of Elia and her children. Tension soared. Bran often sat quietly, letting the mortal lords bicker. He knew that once the illusions spoke, the pettiness would be drowned out by raw truths. He did not need to force a shape to these events. The realm's guilt would shape them. But Sansa's skillful diplomacy and Tyrion's silver tongue managed to keep everything from imploding before the council even began. Jaime offered a subdued presence, occasionally stepping in to remind his distant kin that defiance would lead only to further condemnation. Finally, the day dawned when Daenerys Targaryen arrived. She rode at the head of a column of Unsullied, with Grey Worm by her side. A single dragon soared overhead, Drogon, black as a void in the sky, still majestic, though rumors said he was the last living dragon. The castle's inhabitants watched in mingled awe and fear. Daenerys herself wore a somber expression, as though the burdens of her own lineage weighed heavily upon her. She had demanded justice once, in fire and blood, but had since tempered her approach after witnessing the devastation it caused. Now she came to see if justice could be achieved through truth, or if the cycle of violence was doomed to repeat. Sansa greeted her courteously, and Daenerys nodded in return. The Targaryen queen's gaze flicked to Bran, curiosity tempered with caution. She knew well of his powers. Tyrion had told her enough, and she understood the illusions were unstoppable. Still, she gave him a respectful inclination of her head. "Lord Stark," she said. "We meet again, under different circumstances." "Yes," Bran replied quietly. "Much has changed since our meeting at Winterfell." Daenerys's eyes held a swirl of emotions: loss, regret, determination. But she said nothing more, turning to oversee the final security details. Even she, the mother of dragons, could not fully control what was to happen in the days ahead. And so it began, the Council of Truth. Lords and ladies filed into Riverrun's great hall, which had been arranged with long wooden tables forming a broad half-circle facing a raised dais. There, seats were placed for Daenerys, Sansa, a representative of the faith, a grave-faced septon chosen for his even-handed reputation, and a few others, including Bran, who was given a chair that placed him at their side. Each house brought retainers, some in fine silks, others in tarnished armor. The tension in the air crackled like distant thunder. One by one, representatives of each house came forward. Some gave prepared speeches, denouncing the old crimes, pleading for forgiveness, or proclaiming their innocence. Others were defiant, asserting that illusions proved nothing, that half of what was shown was rumor. Yet the illusions persisted night after night. At times, as if conjured by the weight of the moment, flickers of phantom images appeared in the hall itself, brief glimpses that made noblemen gasp and clutch at their seats. A swirl of red smoke might reveal a battered child on the floor of the Red Keep, or a shadowy figure slitting a throat at the twins. No voice spoke these illusions aloud, they simply emerged, as if the weirwoods themselves demanded to be heard. Through it all, Bran remained mostly silent, watching. The illusions were beyond direct control once unleashed, though he could guide their focus in subtle ways. He wanted the realm to see the broad tapestry of lies, to understand how the Lannisters had manipulated events, yet also to see that Lannisters were not alone in guilt. Others had contributed to the realm's miseries as well. He offered glimpses of how each decision fed into a cycle of vengeance. Some watchers trembled with shame, others paled with recognition. A few tried to close their eyes, but illusions that came from within their own minds could not be so easily banished. Then came the moment that everyone had awaited, the Lannisters themselves. Jaime, clad in a simple tunic bearing the lion's sigil, stood alongside Tyrion, who wore the hand's pin on his breast. A handful of lesser Lannister lords flanked them, looking as though they would rather be anywhere else. In the hall's hush, they stood before the dais where Daenerys, Sansa, the Septon, and Bran watched. Behind them stretched rows of onlookers from a dozen houses, eyes hungry for condemnation or blood. Tyrion spoke first, voice carrying through the silence with a careful blend of humility and directness. "My lords and ladies, we stand here as Lannisters, who have shaped recent history more than most. Much of that shaping has been to our benefit and the realm's detriment. The illusions you see each night show the truth of our house's deeds. I will not attempt to deny them. We have spilled blood, broken oaths, and pursued power at terrible cost. For that, we must answer." His speech was measured, weaving in moments of personal confession. How he'd been complicit, if unwillingly at times, in Tywin's schemes, how he had done his own share of dark deeds. He acknowledged the murder of Shay, the crossbow bolt that killed his father, even if that might seem justified in some eyes. He admitted that House Lannister's gold had bought assassins, turned wards into enemies, and fueled the wildfire that threatened to burn King's Landing. Whispers rippled through the crowd, some outraged, some scornful, some seemingly satisfied. Jaime then spoke, his voice subdued, lacking the regal confidence of a once-famed knight. "I was called the Kingslayer. I thought I saved King's Landing from madness, but I also committed many sins in the name of my house. I pushed a child from a window to protect a secret. I broke vows. I helped perpetuate the lie that Joffrey was Robert Baratheon's son. For these things I am ashamed. I stand here without illusions, knowing I have no defense except regret." Among the crowd, some spat in disgust. Others watched, transfixed by the sight of the proud Lannister lion laid bare. Jaime's face flushed, but he held his ground. One of the lesser lords, whose daughter had been taken as a hostage years before, stood and shouted, "Regret doesn't heal the scars, Lannister." Tyrion nodded soberly. "Nor should it. We deserve your scorn. But perhaps there is a path forward that doesn't involve more blood. We offer recompense, coin for families harmed, land grants for those displaced by our wars, a formal renunciation of claims that were built on lies. We pledge fealty to the realm's laws and to the sovereign it chooses to follow, be that a Targaryen queen or another rightful ruler. We cannot bring the dead back to life, but we can try to ensure that no more join them in senseless war." Some scoffed at the mention of coin, calling it Lannister guilt money. Others seemed intrigued. The hall buzzed with speculation. Bran observed their reactions, sensing the swirl of conflict. The illusions would not simply vanish because of apologies. But if the realm saw genuine repentance, if enough accepted the notion that some restitution could be made, Daenerys rose from her seat. The hush returned. Her eyes flicked over Jaime and Tyrion. "Words are wind, they say, but sometimes words can change the course of kingdoms. I have seen the illusions of my father's madness, the cruelty that followed House Targaryen. I will not pretend my line is free of sin. Still, I stand here seeking a better world than the one we inherited. The question before us is whether House Lannister can be part of that new world, or if it must be destroyed root and stem for peace to be possible." Murmurs rippled. No one missed the unsubtle threat in Daenerys's words. Jaime's jaw tightened, and Tyrion lowered his head. Sansa spoke then, her voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of steel. "Justice does not always mean annihilation, but House Lannister has to accept the consequences of its past. Are you prepared to yield power, territories, whatever is deemed necessary?" Jaime nodded, hesitating before he spoke, as though each word was pulled from a wounded soul. "Yes, if that is the price for peace, we will pay it." Tyrion added, "We only ask for mercy for those who did not choose these paths. The children and small folk who bear the lion's crest without having had any say in the wars and schemes of their lords. They are as much victims as any others." Another wave of murmurs. Some nodded, recalling how they themselves had been dragged into wars. Others sneered, insisting that the Lannisters had extended no such mercy in the past. At that moment, a swirl of red light flickered across the dais. Bran recognized the sign, an illusion forming in the middle of the hall, visible to all. Gasps rose as an image took shape. Tywin Lannister seated at a war council table, his cold gaze sweeping over a map of the Riverlands. With measured ruthlessness, He dictated orders for the destruction of certain villages, the death of certain families, all in the name of crushing the Tully resistance. The image vanished as quickly as it came, leaving the watchers chilled. Tyrion closed his eyes, pain etched into his features. Jaime dropped his gaze to the floor. The illusions were relentless. The realm was forced to see. A hush fell, broken only by distant coughing. Then the Septon cleared his throat. House Lannister's sins are many, he intoned solemnly. Yet the path of redemption is never wholly barred. What say the lords of Westeros? Do we hold them to account in blood, or do we attempt a new way? That question lingered, crackling with tension. Some demanded immediate punishment, calling for the heads of Jaime and Tyrion or the dismantling of Lannister wealth. Others, especially those who had no love for war, advocated that if House Lannister truly surrendered their power, it might be enough. The debate raged until well past sundown, with voices raised, alliances formed and broken in the space of an hour. Daenerys allowed the discussion to unfold, occasionally stepping in to quell threats of violence. Sansa's voice rang out more than once, urging reason. Arya stood behind her sister, watchful, prepared to act if any fool drew steel. All the while, Bran felt the illusions tugging at the edges of perception, weaving in and out of the Great Hall, ensuring no one forgot the ghosts of the past. Even the darkness beyond the tall windows seemed full of watching eyes. At last, near midnight, a tentative compromise was reached. House Lannister would forfeit certain lands and titles, pay substantial reparations to families wronged during the war, and accept the oversight of a council of lords to ensure compliance. Jaime and Tyrion would maintain a nominal leadership of the Lannister name, but they would be vassals, their power curtailed. If they were found plotting or withholding funds, the penalty would be severe, potentially the dissolution of the house. It was a harsh bargain, but not outright annihilation. A step toward accountability that had never been forced upon a great house so completely before. Jaime and Tyrion bowed their heads, acceptance weighing on them like lead. The Targaryen queen, the Stark lady, the Septon, and representatives from each major region bore witness. The illusions continued to swirl, but something in them began to shift. The venom was still there, but it no longer felt quite so suffocating. Perhaps the realm sensed that the lies were finally being exposed in a forum of truth. When the final terms were declared, the hall erupted in a cacophony of voices, some exultant, some furious, but all unable to ignore the momentousness of what had transpired. Jaime stepped back, trembling slightly as though he had spent the last of his strength on this confession and submission. Tyrion placed a hand on his brother's shoulder, an unspoken mix of regret and relief passing between them. Daenerys kept her regal posture, though her eyes flickered with the understanding that she, too, could one day face judgment for the ashes her dragons had left behind. Sansa looked to Arya, who gave a small nod. They had not undone the scars, but they had forced House Lannister to face them. Bran observed it all with that detached clarity that was now as much a part of him as breathing. He felt the weirwood roots in his soul, stretching through the land, drawing in the swirling energies of this grand confrontation. The illusions would persist, for the truth was not a single day's spectacle, nor a fleeting punishment. But now, if men and women chose to follow a path of honesty, if they heeded the lessons the illusions showed them, the realm might find a glimmer of hope. A path not shaped by an endless cycle of hidden daggers and blood-soaked gold, but by an honesty rarely seen in the history of Westeros. That night, the illusions took on a different tone in the dreams of those gathered at Riverrun. Yes, there were still horrors. The Red Wedding replayed, the cruelty of King Joffrey, the ruthless cunning of Tywin. But there were also fleeting images of what might have been, moments of mercy, roads not taken, alliances that could have spared countless lives. In the morning, some awoke weeping, others thoughtful, and a few resentful. Yet no one could deny that they had witnessed something beyond mortal design. For good or ill, the Lannister lies were laid bare. In the days that followed, the Great Hall echoed with smaller confessions, lesser lords standing to account for their parts in the war. Some sought to atone for betraying neighbors, for carrying out orders that resulted in massacres. Others demanded recognition of their own losses. It was a messy, imperfect process. Deeds done could never be undone. But a corner had been turned. The illusions enforced a strange honesty, as if no one wished to be confronted at night by the weirwood's silent condemnation. As the Council of Truth drew to a close, Daenerys announced that she would remain in King's Landing but would accept the guidance of this new Council of Lords as well. Sansa would return to Winterfell, taking with her the renewed respect of many who had once considered the North a savage land. Tyrion, still her occasional adversary in politics, bowed with surprising sincerity, acknowledging her wisdom and fortitude. Arya lingered on the outskirts, as always, half a step away from the shadows, but there was a lightness to her bearing that suggested she believed they had done some good. Bran, for his part, found himself seated in Riverrun's God's Wood under a thick old oak. He felt the southern air on his face, warmer than the biting northern winds, though still carrying the chill of late autumn. He sensed the weirwood network, still emanating illusions across the land, but now less frantic. The realm's collective conscience seemed to be awakening, confronting horrors instead of burying them. He could not know if this would hold, if men would forget or rationalize their guilt once the immediate shock had passed. But for now it was enough. Jaime came to him there, walking slowly, his posture pensive. He lingered a few steps away from Bran's chair. A hush drifted through the orchard, the leaves stirring with a faint breeze. "I don't know how to thank you," Jaime began, almost in a whisper, "or whether I should. You've condemned my house to humiliation and forced restitution. Everything I once fought to preserve is crumbling." Bran looked at the man who had pushed him from a tower so long ago, the man who had set his own redemption in motion by that very act, in a twisted irony. "Do you believe it's unjust?" Bran asked softly. Jaime shook his head, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "No, it's deserved. That doesn't make it less painful. But maybe this is the only way we can move forward." He let out a shaky breath. "When I die, I'd rather the illusions show that I tried to atone at the end." Bran nodded. "Perhaps they will. But illusions aside, it's the choices we make in the waking world that matter." Jaime gazed at the leaves overhead, golden in the southern autumn. "I'm trying, Bran. It might be too little, too late, but I'm trying." A distant horn sounded, signaling the departure of various lords. The council was coming to an end, the real work just beginning. Jaime bowed slightly to Bran, then turned and walked away, carrying the heavy burden of House Lannister's shame, but also a flicker of resolve. Bran remained, letting the sun fall across his face. He breathed the air and felt the old magic hum inside him. The illusions would not vanish overnight. House Lannister's lies had run too deep, too long, and the realm needed time to mend. But a seed had been planted. That seed was truth, painful and raw, but also a spark of possibility. No illusions remained within Bran's own mind. He had accepted what he was. The boy who fell, the green seer who rose. His powers had woven a tapestry that forced the lions into the light. If the realm had the courage to face that light, to shape a future beyond the old betrayals, then perhaps all the suffering had not been in vain. He closed his eyes and sank into the quiet calm of the Godswood. The wind carried faint echoes of voices from centuries past, the ghosts of kings and queens, knights and rebels, all who had lived and died unday. "Are the illusions of power?" It whispered to him of new stories, new hopes, if only men would heed the warnings carved in blood. He let the wind guide him, let the old magic swirl around him, content in the knowledge that he had used his gifts to break the silence that had cloaked so many crimes. He had, in his own way, given the realm a chance to begin again. When he opened his eyes, the afternoon light had shifted and a subtle peace settled in his heart. He thought of his family, Sansa's strength, Arya's fierce loyalty, Jon's burden far in the north, and he smiled. The Starks had weathered more storms than most houses could fathom. They had lost, they had suffered, and they had learned. Now, by laying bare the Lannisters' lies, Bran hoped the realm might learn, too. Standing upon the threshold of a new chapter, he felt, for the first time in a long while, a glimmer of hope. The illusions still danced across the realm, but not with the aim of stoking hatred alone. They were a mirror, and if people looked deep enough, they would see not just Lannister sins, but all the hidden truths that shaped their world. Perhaps that was the greatest gift and curse of the three-eyed raven, to lay bare the tapestry of history so that no more threads of deceit could be woven without consequence. Winter might come again, wars might rise. But for now, truth stood where once only lies reigned. And as Bran gazed up at the drifting clouds, he whispered a silent prayer to the old gods that this time the realm would not squander its chance to shape a better destiny. He let his mind drift, touching every corner of Westeros, 1,000 eyes seeing, remembering, and softly guiding, so that the next chapters written in the realm's story might be forged in honesty and perhaps, in time, forgiveness. Bran returned to Winterfell with the hush of distant echoes still trembling in his mind. The Council of Truth at Riverrun had changed the balance of Westeros in ways no single soul could fully predict. Night after night, illusions continued to stir across the Seven Kingdoms, but their tone had shifted. Where before they seemed fueled by accusation and the raw edges of old wounds, now there was a sense of reluctant honesty, a recognition, perhaps, that these visions existed to remind everyone that no deed was ever truly forgotten. In taverns and castle halls, stories abounded of nightmares that revealed not just Lannister crimes but hidden truths of other houses, old betrayals, broken oaths, even unacknowledged acts of valor. It was as though the realm itself was purging its memory piece by piece, forcing every corner of its history to come into the light. Yet the Lannisters remained the focal point, and rightfully so. Months passed, and Jaime and Tyrion fought desperately to uphold the terms of the agreement reached at Riverrun. Their kin at Casterly Rock glowered in frustration, well aware that House Lannister would never again stand as an unassailable pillar of wealth and cunning. The gold mines still ran rich, but it felt as though the gold itself was tainted. No matter how much gleamed in their coffers, they could not ward off the self-reflection that came at night, nor the lingering anger of lords who had waited years for justice. Small folk, once too terrified to speak, now felt emboldened to demand fairer treatment. Knights who had served the lions under fear or false pretenses found themselves drifting away to other banners. The illusions continued to show each Lannister transgression in stark detail, making it impossible for the house to hide behind old bravado. Within the walls of Winterfell, Bran found a quiet acceptance of what he had unleashed. Every now and then he felt the brush of a raven's wing in his consciousness, glimpsing some new snippet of memory or dream from across the continent. It was never a single voice, rather a chorus of confessions, revelations, and pleas that swelled and receded like the tides. While it weighed upon him, it also felt necessary. For too long, the realm had survived on half-truths, and if it was to heal, it needed an unvarnished foundation. Sansa busied herself with the governance of the North. Though her standing had risen after the Council of Truth, lords and ladies across Westeros marveled at how the Stark name had become a beacon of justice. She took little pleasure in it. She kept the North stable, forging new trade routes and alliances, ever wary of outside forces that might test Winterfell's defenses. Arya, restless as always, slipped in and out of Winterfell, following rumors that pockets of Lannister loyalists plotted revenge. She had left one morning without a word, a habit she had perfected from her time across the Narrow Sea. On her departure, she had simply pressed a hand against Bran's shoulder and said, "I'll return when I can." Then she was gone, a shadow among shadows. Jon, still grappling with his own identity and uncertain destiny, remained near the distant northern borders where wildlings and free folk struggled to rebuild lives in the aftermath of the long night. Though the Great War with the White Walkers had ended, if indeed it was truly ended, countless scars remained. Jon had taken it upon himself to see that those who had joined the fight were not forgotten, that they had a chance to survive beyond the wall or within the northernmost reaches of the realm. This duty had become an unspoken penance, a weight on his shoulders that felt as vast as the tundra itself. In King's Landing, Daenerys Targaryen attempted to rule with a more tempered approach. The illusions had not spared her entirely. People whispered of visions showing the Mad King's final days, of glimpses of her own moments teetering on the edge of fury when she first claimed the city. Tyrion wrote frequently to Bran, describing how Daenerys wrestled with these reminders of her father's madness and her own near descent into destructive rage. The Queen recognized that the illusions were not aimed solely at House Lannister, that every corner of Westeros harbored secrets, and each would be laid bare in time. She tried to use that knowledge to prevent new atrocities, though ruling a city as vast and scarred as King's Landing was no small feat. The Red Keep echoed with ghosts, especially at night, when illusions sometimes flickered in the halls, moments from Robert's rebellion, from Joffrey's tyrannical rule, from the sack of King's Landing. The atmosphere in the capital remained tense, as though the city were holding its breath, waiting to see if the Queen's mercy would hold or if fear would once more ignite something dreadful. One late afternoon, as the days grew shorter, 2 new visitors arrived at Winterfell. Bran sensed their presence before the guards announced them. He felt the swirl of conflicting emotions, the quiet hum of regret, and the faint burn of hope. By the time the two riders entered the courtyard, escorted by wary Northmen, Bran was already waiting in the Great Hall. He recognized them both, though they had changed. Jaime Lannister, cloaked in heavy furs, stood beside Brienne of Tarth, whose expression was resolute as ever. Jaime's golden hand caught a dull reflection from the torchlight. He bowed his head slightly when he caught sight of Bran, while Brienne placed a hand to her sword hilt in formal salute. "We've come from Casterly Rock," Jaime said, voice carrying a note of weariness. "I would speak to you and Lady Sansa if you'll allow it." Sansa, seated in the Lord's chair upon the raised platform, nodded once. "You've come a long way and you're welcome as guests, provided you intend no harm." Her tone held an undercurrent of caution. Old memories of King's Landing still lingered, and though she had grown to respect Jaime's recent efforts, she would never forget the part he had played in her family's initial ruin. Brienne cleared her throat gently. "We bring news of the Westerlands. There is trouble. Not open rebellion, but a stirring of discontent that could escalate if left unchecked." Sansa glanced at Bran, then motioned for the visitors to step forward. The Great Hall was not crowded, only a handful of northern lords, guards, and a few curious onlookers stood by, eyes alert. Jaime bowed again, more deeply this time, and began his report. "House Lannister tries to honor the terms of the Council of Truth. We have relinquished certain lands near the border with the Riverlands, paid debts owed to families who suffered our father's punishments. Tyrion has diverted some of the Rock's gold to aid in rebuilding efforts in places we once ravaged. But not all of our kin agree with this atonement. A faction led by my cousin Damian Lannister is calling it weakness. They've begun to gather knights who want to cast off what they call the yoke of Stark Dragon tyranny." He paused, a trace of irony in his smile. "They claim you and Daenerys are conspiring to keep House Lannister subdued forever." Sansa pursed her lips. "We conspired to demand the truth. Had your house not committed such cruelties, there would be no truths to reveal." Brienne nodded in agreement. "Damian and his supporters are traveling the Westerlands, stoking fear, claiming the illusions are an attack on the Lion's legacy. They whisper that if House Lannister does not rise again in full glory, the West will be reduced to a vassal state." She paused, scanning the faces in the hall. "We fear they may do more than whisper soon." Some of the northern lords traded uneasy glances. One older lord, his beard as white as the snows outside, cleared his throat. "Sounds like your own folk are not content to face the consequences of their crimes." Jaime did not bristle at the remark. He had grown used to such barbs and accepted that they were not undeserved. "They cling to the idea that Lannisters must rule from a position of unquestioned dominance, just as my father did. Casterly Rock has never knelt so humbly, and it galls them. They blame me, Tyrion, and anyone else who cooperates with the New Order. They claim we are selling out House Lannister for the sake of appeasing our enemies." Sansa's expression remained measured. "And you've come here because you want our help to stop them?" Brienne answered with a steady voice. "Jaime believes the illusions will only get stronger if more blood is spilled on behalf of old lies. We came because we do not want another war. We don't want a splinter group of Lannisters undermining this fragile peace. We also know what happens when the illusions turn from revelation to condemnation. Families become trapped in endless cycles of rage." Bran listened quietly, feeling the faint tremor of possibility in the air. If Damian Lannister rallied enough discontented knights, the West could erupt into civil strife. That conflict might spill across the realm, giving other malcontents, perhaps even old Ironborn raiders or rebellious lords in the Reach, an excuse to strike while the main powers were distracted. Westeros could slide once more into chaos before it had even fully recovered from the last wars. He leaned forward, meeting Jaime's gaze. "Do you believe Damian can be reasoned with?" Jaime's mouth twisted into a grimace. "I doubt it. He's always resented Tyrion, blamed him for the death of our father. Now he sees me as an enabler. The illusions don't disturb him as much as they infuriate him. He believes them a curse conjured by you, a northern witchcraft that must be snuffed out. If I'm honest, I fear reason won't sway him." Bran let that settle. "Then we must be prepared for the possibility of force, though we would prefer to avoid it." He paused, considering the webs that might be spun around the West. "The illusions cannot be undone, and they won't cease because a few disgruntled lions want to bury the truth again. If Damian tries to raise arms, the illusions will only show the realm exactly who is stirring the pot of violence. He will not be able to hide from that." Brienne nodded gravely. "But in his desperation, he could kill many people before the realm unites against him." Sansa sighed, rising from the seat. The heavy cloak of Winterfell's lady cascaded behind her, each step echoing through the hall. "Ser Jaime, Ser Brienne, your warnings are appreciated. We'll send ravens to King's Landing and to Lord Edmure Tully so they know of this threat." The realm must stand in unity if House Lannister fractures from within. Jaime inclined his head. Thank you, Lady Stark. Then, more softly, I wish it hadn't come to this. We're trying to mend the wounds, but there are always those who prefer war to humility. Bran, silent until now, spoke in a low voice that carried an otherworldly calm. We may have to act swiftly. If Damian's faction incites open rebellion, the illusions will reveal their every plot and crime for all to see, yet it may still cost lives to quell them. We must show the realm that the consequences for stoking old lies are real. Sansa placed a hand on Bran's chair. We can also send our own envoys, perhaps Lord Glover or one of the more tactful northern lords, to meet with Damian. Try to defuse this. Failing that, we stand ready. Jaime and Brienne exchanged glances. It was a slender hope, but better than meeting Damian's swords the moment they were drawn. They accepted Winterfell's hospitality for the night, though neither seemed at ease in those ancient halls. The memories of House Stark's tragedies were woven into the stones, and Jaime, in particular, felt the weight of his own history each time he passed a torchlit corridor. In the gloom, he could almost see the shade of his younger self in polished Kingsguard armor, sneering at everything the North held sacred. That night, Bran withdrew to the Godwood. The weirwood's pale trunk caught the moonlight, the carved face drenched in silver luminescence. He breathed in the winter air, letting his mind drift. Through the silent network that connected the old trees, he sought the heart trees near the Westerlands. The illusions that roamed men's dreams were at once everywhere and nowhere, a phenomenon that could be guided but not entirely controlled. He found flickers of restlessness, corners of the night where discontent pulsed like a slow drumbeat. He saw glimpses of armed men gathering in torchlit halls, Damian Lannister standing by a fire, speaking of vengeance, claiming the West must reclaim its honor. There was a fervor in his eyes, a twisting of pride that Bran recognized all too well, an arrogance nurtured by centuries of Lannister supremacy. The illusions answered that arrogance. Bran glimpsed Damian's dreams. Tywin's darkest war councils, the screams of the innocent during the sack of King's Landing, the betrayal of Elia Martell, the Red Wedding's ghostly violins. Yet Damian resisted, sealing his heart against remorse. He interpreted the illusions as an assault, a trick of northern sorcery. And in that false interpretation, he found the will to gather supporters who wanted to see House Lannister rid itself of shame, no matter how stained its past truly was. Bran let the vision fade. Snow drifted onto the Godwood, silent as memory. If Damian persisted, war was likely. And if war came, the illusions would intensify, showing every atrocity in real time, as if the Weirwood net wanted no more hidden crimes in Westeros. Bran felt sorrow coil in his chest. Was there no end to the cycle of blood for pride's sake? A moon later, the first sparks of open conflict began in the Westerlands. Damian Lannister refused to pay the required restitution to a cluster of Riverrun villages that Tywin's armies had once burned. When the local Tully bannermen arrived to collect that debt, terms agreed upon at the Council of Truth, Damian's knights turned them away at sore point. The illusions in that region grew more potent, with villagers describing waking dreams of Tywin's outrages, of Tywin's men slaughtering peasants for sport. Fear caught fire, and peasants fled, spreading word that the Lannisters were reneging on their oaths. Tyrion scrambled to contain the crisis. He dispatched gold and letters to these villages, hoping to reassure them that House Lannister would fulfill its commitments. But Damian intercepted the shipments, publicly denouncing Tyrion as a traitor to his own blood. Jaime, stuck in an impossible position, tried to ride west to parley with his cousin. Upon reaching a crossroads near Ashmark, Jaime was met by a band of Damian's knights, who barred his way and demanded he turn around. Outnumbered, Jaime was forced to retreat in humiliation. Whispers spread that House Lannister was on the verge of tearing itself apart from within. In Winterfell, Sansa received frantic letters from Tully bannermen claiming that Damian's men had begun crossing the Red Fork into their lands. Nothing on the scale of a full invasion yet, but raids, intimidation, sporadic violence. She convened her council of northern lords along with Bran. Some argued the North should stay out of any Lannister civil war, let the lions devour each other. Others insisted that if the fighting spilled into the Riverlands, the Starks had an obligation to help their kin. In the end, Sansa decided to send a small contingent of northern cavalry under the Stark banner to Riverrun as a symbolic reinforcement of the Tully lines. She would not commit to a full mobilization yet, hoping that cooler heads in the west might still prevail. Bran watched it all unfold with a heavy heart. In the dream realm, illusions flared wherever Damian's men rode, revealing slaughters old and new. At times, they even showed Damian himself, a stern-faced knight in a lion-crested helm, forging letters in Tywin's name, or whispering commands in secret to torch a farm in the Riverlands. The truth spilled uncontrollably through the nights until men across Westeros could hardly sleep without seeing flickers of blood on the snow or hearing the weeping of the dead. Slowly, the realm awakened to Damian's growing rebellion. Tyrion sent ravens pleading for Daenerys' aid, but King's Landing remained cautious. The Queen had just begun to rebuild trust in the Crownlands. Marching her unsullied into the Westerlands could spark another wave of resentment. Tyrion wrote to Sansa, to Edmure Tully, to Dorne, to the Vale, anyone who might help quell Damian's faction. Though there was some unity of purpose, everyone feared inflaming the conflict further. And so the lines hardened, each side wary, each day bringing new reports of skirmishes. If Tywin Lannister had once used fear to bind lords to him, Damian was trying the same tactic, only this time the illusions countered him at every turn, ensuring that the realm saw each drop of blood spilled. Despite the chaos, a smaller current of hope threaded through Westeros. Many lords refused to join Damian. They had seen what the illusions did to any who tried to shield old crimes in darkness. These lords recognized that if they gave Damian open support, they would become complicit in once again burying the truth. Mercantile towns in the Westerlands, dependent on trade, also began to turn against Damian's rhetoric, aware that war would destroy commerce. Even some lesser Lannister cousins, grateful for the respite from Tywin's era of iron discipline, sided with Jaime and Tyrion. Yet Damian needed only a devoted core of zealots, enough to keep the region in turmoil to threaten the fragile peace. While the north prepared, winter storms gathered strength. Snow blanketed the King's Road, making travel slow for large forces. Sansa's cavalry marched south in small groups, hoping to avoid drawing too much attention. She tasked Lord Glover and an experienced commander, Lady Ryswell, to lead them. Bran remained at Winterfell, his powers more vital in the castle's godwood than they would be on any battlefield. From that vantage, he could guide illusions to some degree, showing the West and the Riverlands exactly who was initiating the violence, ensuring Damian's lies had no chance to become accepted fact. If Damian tried to claim that Tullus had attacked first, illusions of his initial raids would appear in the dreams of the realm, condemning him as the aggressor. If he tried to blame Tyrion for withholding gold, illusions revealed how Damian himself seized those funds. Every time Damian's cause might have gained traction, the illusions answered with evidence of the truth. But still, men fought and died in small skirmishes, for pride is often deaf to reason. Jaime sent desperate letters to Sansa explaining how he had confronted Damian once more outside the gates of a small castle named Deep Den. Damian had arrayed his knights in a show of force, demanding Jaime join him or stand aside. Jaime refused, urging Damian to recall the shame Tywin had earned, how illusions had shown the realm the monstrous path the lion had trod. Damian spat back that Tywin had forged an empire by breaking enemies and that illusions were just northern shadows he refused to fear. The standoff ended without bloodshed that day, but Jaime knew the reckoning would come soon. As the situation worsened, Tyrion himself traveled from King's Landing to Casterly Rock, hoping he could still reason with Damian. He wrote to Bran of his journey, describing a land intention. Whole villages took down Lannister banners, either out of shame or to avoid being associated with a house so divided. Others hung them proudly in open defiance, flaunting Damian's crest as though it were a different sigil altogether. At night, illusions stalked Tyrion's dreams, reminding him of all the times he had struggled for acceptance in his own family. He saw the ghost of Shae, the lines of bitterness on Tywin's face, the moment he stood trial for Joffrey's murder. These illusions kept him awake, trembling with regrets and resentments, but also fueling a determination to never let House Lannister sink so low again. When Tyrion arrived at the Rock, he found it half-emptied of soldiers. Damian had taken most of them on campaign, leaving a skeleton garrison behind. The place felt eerie, as though haunted by Tywin's stern visage. By the flickering torchlight of the Grand Hall, Tyrion and the castle maester drafted urgent messages to every major lord in the West who still professed loyalty to peace. Meanwhile, Tyrion walked the corridors where he had once felt so unwanted, brushing his fingers along the cold stone, reminding himself that he had outlived Tywin's cruelty. Late one night, an illusion flickered before him. He saw himself as a child hidden in a corner while Tywin and Cersei discussed ways to humiliate him. The vision vanished as quickly as it came, leaving Tyrion with tears in his eyes. For all the terror these illusions brought, they also forced him to confront the past with unblinking clarity. If there was any redemption for House Lannister, it would have to be won by acknowledging every piece of its history, no matter how dark. As winter deepened, so did Damian's rebellion. Freezing rains fell across the Westerlands, turning roads into quagmires of mud and half-frozen slush. Supplies ran short for both rebels and loyalists. Raids became more frequent. Houses near the borders tried to declare neutrality, but Damian's men raided them for supplies regardless, and illusions soon showed those crimes to everyone. Desperation gripped the region, and even in King's Landing, word arrived daily of the West's unraveling. Daenerys Targaryen debated sending a small force of Unsullied to assist, but her advisors worried about the optics of Targaryen troops intervening in Lannister lands. The last thing the realm needed was the appearance of another foreign occupation. So the Queen hesitated, hoping the West could resolve its own crisis before the illusions dragged everyone into another war. Meanwhile, at Riverrun, Edmure Tully braced for the worst. Northern cavalry had reinforced him, but he did not relish the idea of hosting a bloodbath on his doorstep. He wrote to Sansa, describing the tension in the region. He implored her to push for a quick resolution, though what form that might take was unclear. The illusions, as ever, lit up the nights, showing old hatreds, old betrayals, forcing men to see how easily they could slip back into the horrors of the past if they let pride run wild. Still, few marched into battle with open hearts. Most did so out of fear or a misguided sense of fealty. Amid this turmoil, Jaime sought out Brienne once more. She had returned to Winterfell after their previous journey, but upon hearing of the rising crisis, she rode south in haste. They met on a storm-lashed hillside near the Gold Road, each drenched by icy rain. Bran, following the scene through the eyes of a passing raven, watched as Jaime and Brienne spoke urgently, their words lost in the roar of wind. Brienne's posture was unyielding, a pillar of integrity, while Jaime's shoulders were hunched, weighed down by sorrow. After a long exchange, they embraced briefly, an embrace less of passion than of shared grief for what was unraveling around them. Bran pulled away from the raven's consciousness, letting the moment fade. Even in the darkest conflicts, there were glimpses of genuine human connection, regrets, affections, loyalties that transcended old boundaries. The illusions could expose everything, but they could not wholly extinguish the sparks of decency in those who still believed in it. When Damian finally made his move against the Tully border, everyone feared the worst. He marched with nearly 3,000 men, knights, foot soldiers, sellswords lured by gold. They reached the edges of the Red Fork, where a smaller force of Tully men and northern cavalry awaited in a makeshift fortress of wooden palisades and sharpened stakes. In the frigid dawn, horns sounded on both sides. A wave of dread coursed through the lines, for though many wore the Lannister lion, they could not easily forget the illusions that nightly paraded the sins of that sigil. On the Tully side, men gripped their spears, uncertain if they faced a handful of zealots or a tidal wave of renewed Lannister wrath. Jaime, having failed to negotiate a peaceful settlement, rode in haste behind Damian's column, calling for them to halt. But by the time he arrived on the battlefield, Damian's vanguard had already clashed with the Tully perimeter. Steel rang against steel, and the muddy ground was churned red with blood. Northern archers loosed volleys from behind the palisades, while Damian's knights tried to form a wedge and smash through. The illusions, as if triggered by the outbreak of violence, rose in the minds of both armies. Some men dropped their weapons mid-charge, struck by horrific visions of the Red Wedding or the sack of King's Landing. Others steeled themselves and fought on, driven by desperation or a twisted sense of vengeance. From afar, Bran felt it like a ripple through the weirwood network. He could see crows perched on dead branches near the battlefield, their black eyes reflecting scenes of horror. With each drop of blood spilled, illusions multiplied, surging through the dreams of everyone in the vicinity, even some who tried to keep their distance. The realm felt it too, like a shockwave that reminded them how easily old wounds could tear open. In Winterfell, Sansa stood by the hearth, reading Raven scrolls with trembling hands, each line confirming that the West had indeed exploded into open war. Jaime, riding through the chaos, tried to rally men away from the assault. He shouted Damian's name over and over, demanding to speak. Finally, he found his cousin at the edge of a rampart, leading a charge that battered at the Tully defenders. Damian's horse was spattered with mud and blood, his face contorted with fury. Jaime spurred his own steed close, brandishing his golden hand, trying to block the next push. "Stop this madness," he roared, ignoring the swirl of illusions that made it seem as if Tywin himself stood on the battlements, commanding an unseen army. "You'll destroy House Lannister forever." Damian glared, his eyes wild under a half-slipped helm. "It was destroyed the moment you bowed to those illusions, Jaime. The moment you and Tyrion sold our name for your precious atonement. I'll not see the lion muzzled by northern sorcery." Jaime's heart pounded, dread and rage colliding in his chest. "Fool, don't you see the illusions are the truth? Our father's sins, our sister's manipulations, these are no lies. We must face them, or we become them. Damian spat at the ground. Easy for you to say, Kingslayer. You never knew honor anyway. That barbed insult struck Jaime with unexpected pain. Once, he had been proud of being the best swordsman in the realm, but now he stood battered by regret, unsure if he even deserved to live. He steeled himself. Yes, he said, voice raw. I was the Kingslayer. I own that. But I won't let you drag the West back into the shadows Tywin cast. Stand down before more men die. Damian roared and spurred his horse forward. Jaime barely had time to parry the blow with his metal hand. Sparks flew and Jaime's horse reared. Around them, men bled and screamed in the mud, illusions dancing in every wide, terrified eye. Jaime managed to keep his seat, but Damian's blade came again, striking Jaime's shoulder. The blow glanced off steel, but the force jolted him painfully. Desperate, Jaime circled away, trying to avoid killing his cousin, yet aware Damian sought his life. Their duel wove amid the chaos of the battlefield, a swirl of mud, blood, and illusions that flashed in the corner of Jaime's vision. One moment he saw Damian, the next he saw an echo of Tywin shouting commands in a memory. Then he saw Cersei's face, twisted with cunning. The illusions threatened to unmoor him, but Jaime pressed on, gritting his teeth, focusing on the immediate danger. Damian was a formidable knight, unburdened by remorse, while Jaime's skill had diminished with the loss of his sword hand. Still, Jaime had learned to fight again, taught partly by Bran, partly by Brienne, and partly by his own unrelenting will. For long minutes, they clashed. Hoofs churned the slippery ground. Soldiers on both sides parted, unwilling or unable to intervene. Jaime finally managed to knock Damian's blade aside and ram his golden hand into Damian's helm, denting the metal. Damian reeled, blood trickling from his lip. Jaime struck again, ripping the helm away. Damian's hair was drenched in sweat, his eyes blazing with hatred. Yield, Jaime gasped. His own breath burned in his lungs. Don't make me do this. Damian bared his teeth. I yield only to a true lion, not a cur who licks Stark boots. He lunged, his blade a blur. Jaime twisted in the saddle, but not fast enough. The tip sliced across his side, drawing blood. Jaime's vision darkened momentarily from pain. Summoning every ounce of skill, he slashed upward in a desperate counter. His steel found the gap in Damian's armor beneath the arm, sinking deep. Damian froze, eyes wide. For a moment, the illusions around Jaime vanished, leaving only the stark reality of a dying man impaled on his blade. Damian coughed, a red bubble forming at his lips. Then he slumped in the saddle, sliding off his horse into the mud. Everything grew quiet around them, as if the clang of steel and the screams of wounded men had faded into a shocked hush. Jaime lowered his sword arm, blood soaking into his tunic, breath ragged. He stared down at Damian's still form, the swirling mud around the body turning black with spilled lifeblood. In that eerie silence, illusions rose again, and Jaime saw Tywin's face, disappointed, wrathful. He saw Cersei in the Red Keep. He saw Joffrey on the Iron Throne. He saw 1,000 scenes of Lannister arrogance and cruelty. They all converged on the corpse of his cousin, the man who had refused to accept the truth of their legacy. Before Jaime's eyes, the illusions offered a final image, Damian as a boy, laughing in the fields near the rock, chasing a kite. It was a memory from long ago, one Jaime had all but forgotten. Then it was gone, and Jaime was left with the stench of war and the bitter taste of guilt. Damian's fall seemed to break the spirit of the rebellious knights. Some tried to fight on, but most realized their commander was gone, and illusions whispered in every ear that the cause was hopeless. The Tully defenders, battered and weary, accepted the surrender of many who dropped their weapons. Others fled into the countryside. By day's end, the field was a morass of corpses, wounded men crying out for aid. In distant corners, illusions shimmered like dying embers, reminding survivors of the cost of stubborn pride. Word spread swiftly across the 7 kingdoms. Damian Lannister was dead, felled by Jaime's sword, and the rebellion had collapsed. Some saw Jaime as a tragic figure forced to slay his own blood to prevent further ruin. Others called him a hero for ending the revolt. A few whispered darkly that House Lannister had once again turned on its own, proving that lions devoured each other when cornered. In King's Landing, Tyrion received the news with a mixture of relief and heartbreak. He penned a letter to Jaime acknowledging the burden of that final blow. "We've lost too many in the name of these illusions," Tyrion wrote, "but we lose far more if we try to pretend they aren't real." He ended by promising that House Lannister would continue to pay its debts to the realm, both in gold and an honest effort to rebuild trust. At Winterfell, Sansa read the accounts of the battle in grim silence. Her lords expressed gratitude that the conflict seemed over, or at least contained. She listened to them speak of casualties and treaties, but her gaze kept drifting to Bran, who sat by the hearth. He looked distant, eyes half closed, as though he saw something beyond the room. He often seemed that way, especially after illusions surged on a battlefield. Later, she found him in the godwood, his chair angled beneath the ancient branches. Soft flakes of snow danced through the twilight. She studied him for a long moment before speaking. "You knew how this would end, didn't you?" Bran's eyes flickered open. The weirwood face behind him seemed to watch with its own carved intensity. "I saw possibilities, not certainties." Damian was consumed by a pride that wouldn't yield to truth. He forced a confrontation, and Jaime had no choice. Sansa rubbed her arms against the chill. "Will the illusions relent now that the rebellion is done?" Bran stared at the red leaves overhead. "They'll never fully relent. The illusions will fade when there's no more deceit to lay bare, no more blood spilled to hide old sins. But men's hearts are complicated, and the realm's history is long. House Lannister may have faced its greatest reckoning, but there are still secrets in every corner of Westeros. My power, our power, only ensures those secrets can't remain hidden forever." She sank down onto a nearby bench, her cloak pooling around her boots. "It's been such a long, bloody road to reach this fragile peace. Sometimes I wonder if we're cursed, that no matter what we do, war finds us again." Bran's voice was gentle. "Perhaps peace is not a destination, but a constant effort. We peel back lies, confront them, try to heal. Then new challenges arise. The illusions show us the worst of ourselves, but they also push us to be better, to avoid repeating the same mistakes." Sansa let out a slow breath, her gaze following the drifting snow. "Then we must keep trying. We owe it to all those who died believing in a better realm." In the weeks that followed, the Westerlands began a slow return to order. Jaime took charge at Casterly Rock, hesitantly but with enough moral authority to command respect. He disbanded the remnants of Damian's faction, offering clemency to those who laid down arms. Some, still bitter, chose exile. Tyrion traveled back and forth between King's Landing and the Rock, ensuring that the promised reparations reached the Riverlands. The illusions did not vanish, but with each passing day they grew less violent, less frequent, as if the realm acknowledged that a measure of justice had been served. Small folk in the West spoke of the great confession House Lannister had made, hoping that no new tyrant would ever rise among the lions. Elsewhere, word spread that the illusions had begun surfacing in other regions with renewed force, perhaps because men now understood their power. In the Vale, lords dreamed of Jon Arryn's final days, speculating on truths about Littlefinger's manipulations. In the Reach, some claimed glimpses of Mace Tyrell's secret treaties and the hidden hand he played in certain intrigues. Even in Dorne, illusions sometimes revealed the final pleas of Elia Martell and the tensions with House Targaryen that preceded Robert's rebellion. The realm was in a constant state of moral inventory, each corner forced to remember that illusions would spare no one who clung to deception. Amid these stirrings, Daenerys summoned another council to King's Landing, this one more modest than the Grand Council of Truth at Riverrun, but still important. She invited representatives from all the major houses to discuss ongoing stability, trade, and the illusions' lasting influence. The North sent Sansa and Bran once more, along with a retinue of loyal knights. Arya, who had returned briefly to Winterfell, refused to accompany them, saying only, "The South doesn't need another wolf prowling its halls." She slipped away again, leaving no hint as to her destination. Bran's journey south this time felt different. The roads were partially cleared of snow, and though the air was still cold, there was a faint promise of spring lingering at the edges of the wind. The illusions had, in a sense, become a part of life, spoken of as a phenomenon everyone had to adapt to, much like the changing seasons. Merchants traded rumors and told tales of seeing dead kings in their dreams, or hearing the voices of old battles on the wind. Many had grown uneasy but also strangely resigned. The illusions were as unstoppable as the turning of the year. When Bran and Sansa arrived at the capital, they found King's Landing in better shape than when they last saw it. Daenerys had invested much of her time in restoring the city, rebuilding sections that were destroyed, providing bread and shelter to the poorest districts. Yet the Red Keep still held an aura of gloom, the shadows of its labyrinthine passages seeming to whisper of the Targaryens and Lannisters who had once roamed them. Outside the keep, the city bustled, but people spoke in hushed voices about the illusions that sometimes manifested near the old dragon pit or in the throne room itself. Tyrion greeted them with tired warmth. The lines on his face told a story of sleepless nights and endless tasks, but he remained as sharp-tongued as ever. He led them to an audience with the queen, who sat in a refurbished throne room that combined Targaryen grandeur with simpler, more functional decor. She rose when Sansa approached, extending a hand in courtesy. There was no outright animosity between them. Too much had happened, and both had recognized the cost of enmity. Daenerys greeted Bran with cautious respect, her violet eyes flicking to the royal dais where the Iron Throne stood, a reminder that the seat of power was not always as it seemed. The queen spoke of the realm's new challenges. With the Westerland's rebellion quelled, we must decide how to handle the illusions that continue to spread. Some lords whisper that a NEW wave of revelations might destabilize us once again. Others say we should simply accept them, that they serve as a moral compass. I wonder what you think, Bran. Sansa glanced at her brother, letting him speak. Bran's voice came as a soft echo in the cavernous throne room. They are not something we can command. They exist because the truths of our past demand recognition. If we remain vigilant, if we address each injustice as it arises, the illusions will not overwhelm us. But if we try to suppress them or deny them, we risk fueling a new wave of chaos. Daenerys nodded thoughtfully. I understand, though it is difficult living with the ghosts of so many errors. Sansa's voice was calm. It may be that living with those ghosts is the only way to ensure we don't repeat them. We saw what happened when House Lannister tried to bury their sins with gold and fear. Others will learn from that, or they will suffer the same fate. Tyrion sighed. Let us hope they learn. My queen, there's another matter. The illusions sometimes reveal acts committed by Targaryen kings long dead, cruelties that weren't widely known. Some in the Crownlands worry that it tarnishes your legacy by association. Daenerys' lips tightened. She had hoped to build a legacy different from her father's. Still, she drew a breath and let it out slowly. If illusions show Targaryen abuses, we must address them as well. The old ways of my house were not always just. We can't hold the Lannisters to one standard and ignore our own. There was a quiet respect in the chamber at those words. Sansa inclined her head. Even the scowling lords standing in attendance seemed momentarily mollified. A realm where each house held itself accountable was a lofty aspiration, but perhaps it was the only path forward. Over the next days, the smaller council convened. Daenerys, Sansa, Bran, Tyrion, representatives from Dorne and the Vale, a few staunch river lords, and even one Greyjoy emissary. They hammered out agreements for trade routes, mutual defense pacts, and a renewed vow to respond with unity if illusions revealed fresh atrocities. The question of who, if anyone, would sit the Iron Throne definitively remained open. Daenerys had claimed it, but some wondered if a new system might better honor the lessons learned. However, no one was quite ready to discard the idea of a monarch, and Daenerys still commanded loyalty from many. It was enough, for now, to keep the realm stable. Each evening, after hours of negotiation, Bran withdrew to a corner of the Red Keep, often the godwood near the castle's walls. Though not a true weirwood, a single heart tree had been transplanted there by order of some distant king. Bran often sat beneath its pale leaves, letting the southern breeze carry the scents of the city. He could feel the illusions swirling beyond the keep, drifting through the streets, occasionally flickering in the lamplight. They showed glimpses of everything. Lordly conspiracies, small folk tragedies, ancient battles. It was a living tapestry of memory, and Bran guided it only in that he made sure no great lie went unchallenged. One night, a voice startled him from his reverie. He turned to see Daenerys approaching, cloaked in a thick fur to ward off the chill. A pair of Unsullied stood discreetly at a distance. She gave Bran a tentative nod, then eased herself onto a low stone bench near the heart tree. "May I join you?" she asked softly. "Of course," Bran replied. He turned his gaze back to the rustling leaves. Daenerys studied the tree with a quiet curiosity. "I don't often come here. The old gods are foreign to me. My ancestors believed in dragons and fire. But I find a certain peace in these leaves." Bran detected a flicker of illusions around her, faint and fleeting. Images of the Mad King screaming for wildfire, of Rhaegar Targaryen singing a sad song, of Daenerys herself wandering through the red waste. Each was a fragment of memory or possibility. "Peace is rare in a place like King's Landing," he said gently. She breathed out. "Yes, sometimes I wonder if I'll ever truly feel at home here, or anywhere. The illusions, your power, they show me glimpses of my father's madness. I see the day he decided to burn them all. I feel how close I came to repeating his mistakes. It's frightening yet also clarifying. I can't lie to myself that my blood makes me righteous. Bran turned his head, meeting her gaze. Your choices have led you away from that path. Blood is just one part of us. The illusions show the truth of what we do with our power. She nodded, a faint tremor in her voice. I want to believe the illusions are leading us toward a better realm, but sometimes I fear they simply torment us, dredging up everything we wish to forget. They can torment, Bran allowed, but perhaps forgetting would be worse. We must not let memory become a weapon we wield in hatred. That's Damian's mistake, and Tywin's before him. We learn from memory, or we are consumed by it. Daenerys smiled sadly. Learning has never been easy for those who crave power, but I'll keep trying. For the sake of the people who followed me, for the sake of those who died trusting I would break the wheel. In that quiet moment, they shared an understanding that went beyond titles or birthright. They were two souls who had seen too much, each carrying burdens older than themselves. The hush of the gods would seem to offer a fragile benediction, a promise that if they stayed honest, maybe, just maybe, Westeros could find a lasting peace. Yet even as the southern wind eased, Bran sensed a distant tremor in the Weirwood network. Far to the north, the wall still loomed, scarred but standing. Jon worked among the free folk, rebuilding their homes and forging new ties. The illusions rarely touched that frozen realm. The old gods had fewer watchers there, fewer souls for dreams to cling to. Still, an unease prickled Bran's mind. The world had been turned upside down by war after war, and the illusions had not undone the possibility of threats lurking in the shadows. He said nothing of this to Daenerys, who eventually rose, offered him a nod, and left, her cloak trailing behind her like a soft whisper. Bran remained beneath the heart tree, letting the hours drift by, lost in a half-trance, sampling the swirl of illusions across Westeros. He felt sadness, relief, fear, and hope all at once. The realm was teetering on a new edge, one defined not by dragons or gold, but by the raw honesty that illusions forced upon them all. When the councils concluded and alliances were strengthened, Sansa and Bran prepared to depart King's Landing. Daenerys bid them farewell with guarded warmth, and Tyrion accompanied them as far as the city gates, promising to visit Winterfell if time allowed. The roads northward were still treacherous with patches of ice, but the Targaryen queen provided an escort to ensure their safe passage through areas known for bandits. More than once on that journey, at lonely inns or quiet villages, townsfolk approached Bran to ask if he could spare them from the illusions. "We're tired of seeing old ghosts," a woman said, her eyes rimmed with tears. "It's too hard reliving everything." Bran could only respond with gentle empathy, explaining that the illusions were not his to withhold or bestow at whim. They were a force that revealed truths, and no one could hide from them entirely. Some folk thanked him instead, saying the illusions had exposed injustices in their own lords' houses and saved them from tyranny. One man offered a simple carving of a raven as a token of gratitude. Bran accepted it quietly, feeling the complexity of his role. He was both messenger and medium, dreaded and revered. All he could do was continue forward, carrying the realm's confessions as a silent witness. By the time they reached Winterfell, the snows had melted into slushy rivulets, heralding the first breath of spring. Sansa oversaw the changing of winter stores, ensuring no one starved as the weather shifted. Ravens arrived daily, some bearing news of progress. Jaime had reorganized the Westerlands under a more just code of laws. The Tullus were rebuilding their ravaged borderland. Trade ships from the Iron Islands had docked peacefully in Lannisport. Others brought troubling tidings: infighting in the Reach, disputes over inheritance in the Vale, rumors that a band of rogue sellswords was harassing caravans near the Stormlands. Always, there were illusions fueling each crisis, laying bare secrets that made men angry or afraid. In the quiet hours, Bran spoke less and less. The illusions consumed much of his focus. He was not making them, but he was their custodian of sorts, the mortal vessel through which the old god's memory channeled. The nights in the god would become a ritual. He would sit beneath the weirwood, eyes clouded, sifting through the realm's collective dream. Sometimes he guided illusions to appear before certain lords or ladies who balanced on the edge of some crucial decision, giving them a nudge toward honesty. Other times he simply watched, letting the illusions form of their own accord. Always he felt a sense of weariness at the immensity of it all. He was no longer truly Brandon Stark, the boy who had dreamed of being a knight. He was something else, something older, and perhaps far lonelier. Sansa worried for him. She would join him in the god would occasionally bringing warm mulled wine or a cloak, but he often sat motionless, lost in the swirl of visions. She could not reach him in those moments, and it pained her to watch him drift further from the ordinary world. Yet she also understood that his power, alien and uncomfortable as it was, served a vital purpose in keeping the realm from sliding back into deception. One evening, she asked if he regretted the illusions, if he wished they could be undone. He considered her question, then answered, "Regret is for those who look away. I look only at what is and what must be seen." Eventually, word came from the distant northern borders. John wrote that many free folk had settled new camps in the Gift, the lands south of the Wall. He also warned of troubling sightings in the far north, strange lights in the night sky, wandering shadows beyond the frost-cragged forests. It was not the White Walkers, no one suggested that, but more a sense that the far north remained uneasy, as if the land remembered the war against the dead and had not yet found peace. The illusions seldom ventured that far, for there were few watchers in the heart trees beyond the wall. Still, Jon's letter carried an undercurrent of foreboding that neither Sansa nor Bran could dismiss easily. Days lengthened and the snows receded. Buds appeared on the trees around Winterfell, a rare sign of rebirth in the north. Markets bustled with travelers from the Riverlands and beyond, seeking the famed hospitality of the Starks. Among these new arrivals came a small party of scholars from Old Town, driven by curiosity about the illusions. They wished to study the phenomenon to determine if it was truly a supernatural event or some elaborate trick. Sansa greeted them politely, though she doubted they would find the neat answers they sought. These scholars set up in one of Winterfell's lesser halls, charting the illusions reported across Westeros, trying to match them with astrology, weather patterns, or local rumors. They interviewed small folk, soldiers, and any who claimed a vivid dream of the illusions. Each night, they recorded the stories, and each morning they conferred among themselves, baffled. Their parchment was filled with accounts that defied rational explanation. A few expressed frustration, suspecting sorcery or mass hysteria. Others cautiously acknowledged that something genuine was at work, an ancient power deeper than their texts could explain. Bran had little interaction with these maesters and learned men. When they asked to speak with him, he granted a single audience. He sat quietly while they peppered him with questions. How do you create the illusions? Can you control who sees them? Why do some illusions vanish after one night, while others persist for weeks? Bran answered only in riddles, explaining that he was no single cause, but rather a conduit for the old god's memory. When they pressed for concrete details, he simply said, "It is not my place to shape the illusions for vanity or vendetta. They arise where the truth is most needed or where men attempt to hide it." The Weirwood network carries the realm's past and demands to be heard. When the audience ended, the scholars left more perplexed than ever. Still, they continued their work, hoping to glean some pattern. Over time, they began to see that illusions gathered where new lies were told or old lies were threatened. It was not random chance, it was a relentless logic of accountability. Yet that logic was rooted in the living tapestry of Westeros's history, something no mortal mind could fully map. The illusions had become a fixture of daily life. Songs were composed about the shadows of truth, minstrels weaving tales of lords who confessed hidden crimes and found redemption, or those who refused and met grisly ends. Some men tried to ward off illusions with charms or potions to no avail. Others performed public atonement rituals in hope of appeasing the old gods. Through it all, House Stark's renown grew, and with it, the weight of expectation. The realm saw the Starks as protectors of truth, pillars that had survived the worst storms. More than one foreign envoy, be they from the free cities or even rumored traders from lands beyond the Sunset Sea, arrived in the north, curious about this land where illusions kept men honest. Amid the swirl of visitors, Brienne of Tarth returned, carrying fresh tidings from the Westerlands. She had helped Jaime consolidate power and ensure that the region submitted to the newly reformed laws. Together, they had overseen the trial of several rebels who had taken part in atrocities under Damian's banner. The illusions had appeared at the trial, forcing confessions that no amount of intimidation could have extracted. Jaime had then pronounced sentences ranging from execution for the worst offenders to forced labor for lesser crimes. Brienne reported that though the West was tense, it was beginning to accept a future where House Lannister no longer held absolute sway but tried, instead, to earn respect by fairness. Sansa, listening to Brienne's account, felt a rare flicker of optimism. "Perhaps the realm truly is changing," she said. "When even the lions abandon blind pride, it gives me hope." Brienne offered a small, honest smile. "Sir Jaime has changed much. He's still burdened by guilt, but I think he intends to use whatever years remain to him in service of something better." Meanwhile, Tyrion occasionally sent letters describing the goings-on in King's Landing. He spoke of Daenerys's efforts to keep the capital stable, of her continuing debates with the small council about how to handle illusions that revealed Targaryen misdeeds in the past. She had chosen to publicly acknowledge such crimes, paying reparations to certain families who could trace their suffering to Aerys's reign or earlier Targaryen excesses. It was an unprecedented move, one that caused some lords to mutter that the queen was spending coin to atone for ghosts. Yet it also won her genuine loyalty from those who benefited, proving that she would not hold herself above the accountability demanded of others. The illusions, for their part, responded to these gestures with a quieter presence in the Crownlands. Fewer nightmares plagued the city, and more illusions came as faint, instructive visions rather than harrowing spectacles. It was as if the old gods themselves recognized the difference between willful deceit and sincere reparation. Spring finally arrived in full, thawing rivers and coaxing the first flowers from the earth around Winterfell. Jon wrote more hopeful tidings from the distant north. The free folk settlements were growing, fields being planted for the first time in decades. He mentioned rumors of scattered undead remains discovered in the deep woods, but the threat seemed dormant. Still, his letter carried an undercurrent of caution, urging vigilance against the mysteries that lurked beyond the realms of men. In that season of fragile renewal, the illusions continued, but their edge felt less keen, at least for the time being. They had forced House Lannister into an unparalleled reckoning. They had prodded Daenerys Targaryen into facing her lineage's darkest chapters. They had emboldened lesser lords to hold their superiors accountable. Few in Westeros truly enjoyed living under such scrutiny, but most had come to accept it as the price of a realm where no lie could flourish unchecked. One afternoon, Bran sat alone in the Winterfell library, an ancient scroll unrolled before him. He rarely engaged in such mundane reading anymore, but this text, an old account of the children of the forest and the forging of the pact with the first men, had drawn his eye. Somewhere among the faded ink, he found references to an ever-watching memory that the children had woven into the weirwood trees, a living record of all that transpired in the land. The scroll hinted that this memory would one day awaken to protect Westeros from consuming itself through deceit and violence. Bran felt a chill run through him. Could it be that this phenomenon had always been destined to happen, and he was simply the vessel chosen to enact it? He read on, but the scroll's end was damaged by time. The last line spoke of a day of great unraveling when the memory would swirl across men's minds, forcing them to see what they had wrought. Then a piece was missing, leaving only a ragged edge of parchment. Bran wondered if that missing piece might have explained what came after. Did the illusions vanish once Westeros learned its lesson? Or did they remain a permanent fixture, a silent guardian? Perhaps no one had ever known. He gently rolled up the scroll, placing it back in its protective case. For a moment, he sat there, thinking of the countless lives already touched by illusions, the families broken or healed by truth, the wars started and stopped by revelations that no rumor could bury. If the illusions persisted forever, would the realm eventually grow weary and find some cunning way to ignore them? Men were resourceful in their capacity for denial. Or would the illusions become so ingrained in everyday life that honesty blossomed naturally, free of fear or ambition? It seemed too hopeful to believe men would all become paragons of virtue, yet perhaps enough of them would try, for their own sake if nothing else. As he emerged from the library, he found Sansa waiting in the corridor. She studied his expression and asked if all was well. He gave a small, cryptic smile. "I was just reminded that none of this is an accident. The illusions are part of the land's deeper magic, older than any king or queen. We're living in the middle of a transformation." She nodded, leading him toward the courtyard where the sun shone over new sprouts of green. "So long as that transformation doesn't consume us, I welcome it. The North is strong, but it's also been battered by so many tragedies. I hope we see a time when children can grow up without fearing illusions or the wars they reveal." Bran gazed at the courtyard, where a handful of small folk children played under the watchful eye of a soldier. The illusions had spared the very young for the most part. They appeared mostly to those who had a part in the realm's tapestry of secrets. Perhaps that, at least, was a mercy. He turned his chair to face Sansa. "The Illusi. Ons are not the enemy. They're a test. And if we pass, the realm may yet know peace." She laid a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Then we'll keep striving, brother, for the sake of every Stark who fell believing in a better world." And so time moved forward day by day. The illusions became woven into the fabric of Westeros, revealing everything from ancient betrayals to everyday cruelties. Some houses learned to adapt, openly confessing wrongs before illusions could strike in horrifying detail. Others clung to deception only to be stripped bare in front of the realm. Wars did not vanish overnight, but they became harder to justify when illusions broadcast each fresh atrocity. Diplomacy, reparation, and compromise gained new strength as alternatives to slaughter. The memory of House Lannister's downfall, especially Damian's doomed rebellion, lingered as a cautionary tale, a reminder that old pride could no longer hide behind cunning words or golden coin. Gradually, Daenerys Targaryen's rule in King's Landing stabilized. She embraced a form of monarchy tempered by councils and regional autonomy, acknowledging that no single throne could command blind obedience in an age of illusions. The major houses maintained their fiefs but were held in check by the knowledge that any injustice might spark illusions that would turn their people against them. In the Westerlands, Jaime and Tyrion worked tirelessly to maintain what was left of their prestige, focusing on fairness and honest governance to rebuild trust. At Casterly Rock, a small godwood was planted, an astonishing move meant to symbolize House Lannister's acceptance of the old god's watchful eye. It would be centuries before that grove grew large enough to house a heart tree, if ever, but the gesture spoke volumes. In the north, Sansa continued her steady leadership. Trade with the Riverlands and Vale flourished, the roads grew safer, and the illusions appeared infrequently, as though the Starks' transparent rule left little for them to expose. Bran remained an enigmatic presence, drifting through the halls of Winterfell or sitting in the godwood for hours at a time. When travelers arrived asking to meet the Weirwood Prince, he received them politely, though he offered little beyond a calm, knowing gaze. Those who came seeking to harness the illusions or beg for their removal left disappointed. Gradually, fewer attempted to petition him, realizing that this magic was not a tool for mortal ambitions. Seasons turned, and rumors emerged that another great council might be convened in a few years to decide the future of the Iron Throne, whether it should remain hereditary, be elected, or even be abolished. Daenerys did not fight this suggestion, though she did not champion it either. She recognized that the illusions had eroded the absolute authority of any single ruler. If the realm voted to transition to a different system, so be it. For now, she concentrated on ensuring stability and guarding against external threats. Occasionally, she would write Sansa to discuss the illusions' effect on far-flung corners of the kingdom, how they shaped local politics, how they might pave the way for more representative governance. In King's Landing, the small folk spoke of ghostly figures wandering the Red Keep, echoes of Rhaegar's final stand on the Trident, or the moment the Mad King confronted Tywin's troops. Yet these phantoms never harmed anyone. They seemed more like living memories, gentle or tragic reminders of how power could corrupt or inspire. A sense of awe rather than terror hung in the city's air, as if the illusions had matured alongside the realm. At Winterfell, the first real blossoms of spring flourished in the gardens. One dusk, Bran wheeled himself out to the courtyard where he found Sansa watching a pair of ravens hop about near the well. She turned at his approach and he offered her a rare full smile. The day's light, soft and golden, caught in her auburn hair. A hush filled the air, as though the stones of Winterfell were listening. He said, "We've come a long way from that first day when I tried to reveal the Lannisters' lies." She smiled in return, her eyes bright with memory. "Yes. You set something in motion none of us fully understood. And now, do you think it was worth it?" She hesitated, looking out across the walls where banners fluttered. "It was painful. Horrific at times. We lost good people, always do in these struggles. But we forced a realm built on deception to face itself. We ended a rebellion that could have reignited the worst of the war. We saw House Lannister abandon centuries of arrogance. If that means a chance at lasting peace, then yes, it was worth it." Bran closed his eyes, letting the final warmth of sunset fall over him. "The illusions will remain as long as the realm needs them. But I sense they may mellow. Perhaps they'll become more of a guiding whisper than a scalding brand." Sansa reached for his hand, pressing it gently. "Then let them whisper. And let us heed them." They stayed like that for a moment, brother and sister bound by the trials of fate, the last science of a house that had been tested beyond measure. Around them, Winterfell carried on. Guards walked the battlements, stable boys fed the horses, cooks prepared the evening meal, and the faint laughter of children echoed from the far corner of the yard. In the sky, a pair of ravens soared together, merging with the crimson clouds of dusk. Bran watched them with the deep, knowing calm of the three-eyed raven, feeling the hum of memory throughout the land. In the days that followed, life continued. Letters came and went, banners rose and fell, illusions appeared and dissipated. Yet a new thread of hope ran through the realm, a sense that a corner had been turned. People spoke more openly of their failings, offered apologies that might once have been unthinkable, engaged in compromises that might once have been dismissed. The illusions, inexorable and patient, lingered in the periphery, ready to expose any who tried to resurrect the old webs of deceit. And so the seeds of a different future were sown across the 7 kingdoms, nurtured by the hardships endured and the truths revealed. Bran remained vigilant, for he knew the realm's capacity for forgetting. Should a new wave of ambition or cruelty arise, illusions would respond with the same relentless clarity. But for now, the storms had quieted. There would be feasts in the north, subdued perhaps by memory but joyful nonetheless, celebrations of survival, of fresh alliances, of a new spring that thawed even the coldest hearts. Sometimes, in the far corners of Westeros, travelers reported seeing a peculiar sight in lonely groves, a young man with dark hair and distant eyes seated in a wheeled chair beneath a heart tree. He would say little but watch them kindly, as though measuring their thoughts in the hush of ancient branches. Some whispered it was the Stark boy who once fell from a tower, now being touched by the old gods. Others swore he was a ghost, for he vanished without a trace. But always, soon after such an encounter, illusions would descend upon that place if there were lies needing exposure, sparing no one who tried to bury the truth. And so the realm adapted to this new reality. Kings and queens, lords and ladies, knights and peasants, none could escape the watchful eyes of the weirwoods or the illusions that soared on ravens' wings. Yet many found that, by embracing truth, they could live without the dread of being unmasked. Laws slowly shifted toward fairness, alliances formed on more honest grounds, and the penitent found forgiveness instead of endless revenge. House Lannister, though humbled, continued to rebuild on a foundation of reluctant honesty, Jaime and Tyrion guiding it toward a future that might finally erase the stain of Tywin's tyranny. What began with a single act, Bran Stark choosing to reveal the Lannisters' darkest lies, grew into a profound transformation across a land long steeped in bloodshed. It was not a perfect peace, nor one guaranteed to last forever. But it was a step in the right direction, a quiet revolution of memory and accountability. Long after the last snows of winter melted, men and women would remember this chapter in Westeros's history, the time when illusions tore away the mask of deceit, when old ghosts walked in dreams, and when a realm once locked in endless wars finally learned the power and the peril of facing the truth. And high above, in the swirl of changing seasons, the ravens still flew, watchful and free, carrying the whispers of the old gods across the skies of a kingdom that, for all its flaws, had chosen to walk the harder path of honesty. If that path held stumbling stones and shadows, so be it. Light and dark, truth and lies, would forever war in the hearts of men. But at least, for now, the illusions stood ready to guide them away from the precipice. An ever-present reminder that winter and memory never truly ended. The whispers spread through Winterfell long before the ravens arrived. Something unsettled had taken root in the far north, beyond the places even the free folk claimed as their domain, where the tundra gave way to a limitless waste of ice. At first, it was only scattered rumors passed quietly by hunters and rangers. They spoke of strange lights flickering above the snowdrifts and silhouettes sometimes glimpsed in the peripheral darkness. It was nothing conclusive, certainly nothing akin to the terror of the White Walkers that once threatened to lay waste to Westeros. But the stories persisted and multiplied, mingling with talk of the illusions that still played out nightly through the realm. And so, by the time 2 of Jon's scouts crossed the new frontier of the Gift to stand at Winterfell's gates, their news was met with solemn attention. Jon had spent the last 2 years resettling the free folk who had chosen life south of the Wall. He had tried to keep his distance from larger politics, letting the illusions and the Council of Truth unravel the knots of the southern kingdoms. But with the White Walkers defeated, peace had settled. An uneasy one, perhaps, but more solid than anything the realm had seen in decades. Traders ventured north again, bringing seeds and supplies to the newly tilled fields in the Gift. Old keeps and holdfasts near the Wall were being reclaimed. The land was not as fertile as the south, but it held promise. There was no shortage of strong backs or determined hearts. It was from these outposts that the first hints of strangeness came. One scout claimed that on a moonless night, he saw what appeared to be a pale glow drifting across the horizon, like phosphorescent shapes dancing. Another insisted he heard low chanting that set his hair on end, though there was no sign of living souls for miles. In response, Jon sent small patrols to investigate. Most returned empty-handed, laughing off the rumors. But a few did not return at all, and one man stumbled back near death, raving about ghostly figures in the swirling snow. Bran learned of these developments on a crisp spring morning, seated before the hearth in Winterfell's hall while Sansa consulted with northern lords over trade matters. A guard interrupted the meeting to announce that 2 scouts from the far north had arrived and demanded an immediate audience. Sansa rose at once, worry creasing her brow. Though the illusions had kept the realm largely honest and aware, they did not guarantee physical safety from whatever new threats might lurk. She beckoned Bran to come with her. He followed in his wheeled chair, flanked by a pair of loyal guards. The scouts stood trembling in the entryway. They were young, wrapped in fur cloaks that dripped with half-melted snow, and their faces were lined with fear. They bowed awkwardly to Sansa, then glanced at Bran, uncertain whether to address him as Lord Stark or something else. Sansa's voice was steady as she asked what news they brought. One scout, shoulders quivering, spoke of an abandoned wildling camp north of the gorge, near the Frostfangs. They had found it eerily intact. Tents, cooking pots, even weapons left behind without a struggle, as though the inhabitants had simply walked off into the snow and never returned. No footprints led away from the site, and fresh snow had not yet obliterated the traces. Worse, they claimed to have seen a glimmer of bluish-white light on the horizon, a faint swirl that hovered, flickered, and vanished. The mention of bluish-white light would once have conjured panic about the White Walkers, but everyone knew that threat was defeated, or so they believed. Sansa felt the old dread surface nonetheless. She looked at Bran. He had grown more inscrutable by the day, a young man with ancient eyes. He examined the scouts for a long moment, as though reading every detail of their faces. He spoke softly. "This is not the long night returned. I sense no massing of the dead, nor the echo of the Night King's presence. But there is something stirring." He paused, letting the hush weigh on those gathered. The illusions seldom touch those desolate wastes. The weirwoods beyond the wall are scarce, and so the old god's presence is thin. Yet the land itself remembers. Something out there is moving. We should be wary. The scouts exhaled shakily, relieved not to hear that the dead walked once more. But the tension remained. Sansa ordered them to warm themselves by the fire, then instructed a steward to see them properly fed. Once they were gone, she turned to Bran with quiet urgency. Could it be some group of free folk trying to stir fear? Or remnants of other creatures, white still hidden in pockets of ice? Bran stared at the flickering hearth. Possibly. Or it could be a phenomenon of the far north we haven't encountered. The illusions revolve around the realm's truths. Whatever this is, it lies on the very edge of that realm, so it may not be illusions at all. "I'll see what I can discern." Sansa nodded. "I'll send a raven to Jon. He must know." Meanwhile, the illusions that had reshaped the south continued to perform their subtle dance. In King's Landing, Daenerys Targaryen's courtiers reported fewer nightly terrors, a sign that her reforms were taking hold. She had continued to pay reparations for the crimes committed by her father's reign, confronting Targaryen atrocities no one had dared speak of openly while the dragons still soared. In doing so, she earned both respect and resentment. Some old Targaryen loyalists lamented that she was apologizing for the greatness of her house, but those who had suffered under Aerys' tyranny finally felt seen. The illusions in the city grew gentler, more like fleeting memories than savage hauntings. Jaime and Tyrion Lannister in the Westerlands worked diligently to balance the new codes of law they had promised. Though it was still strange to see Lannister men bow their heads in atonement for old crimes, the results were undeniable. Less unrest, fewer illusions raging through the night, and an economy bolstered by trade that no longer cowered under the lion's roar. Every so often, illusions would appear in some minor keep where a lesser lord was caught trying to cheat the new order. Word spread quickly, ensuring such attempts at duplicity were stamped out. Little by little, House Lannister regained a measure of honor, if not the absolute power it once claimed. Jaime, grappling with his personal guilt, found an odd solace in the role of reformed lion, a man determined to prove that the illusions had taught him what his father's iron rule never could. In the north, another flurry of news arrived from the Vale. Lord Robert Arryn, grown older and somewhat healthier under careful tutelage, was forging new alliances to expand trade routes through the mountains. Yet illusions in the area had occasionally shown glimpses of Peter Baelish's manipulations, whispers in dark corridors, coins exchanged for treachery, the betrayal of Ned Stark. Though Littlefinger had long since met his end, the illusions insisted on reminding the Vale that their past was not free of complicity. On more than one occasion, lords in the Vale awakened drenched in sweat from images of Baelish's sly smile. Yet Robert Arryn's regents used these visions as motivation to govern more transparently. Gossip claimed the Vale was experiencing a modest golden age, its roads safer than they had been in years. Meanwhile, Sansa's raven flew north, bearing tidings of the strange phenomenon. Jon received it in a modest wooden hall near the edge of the gift. He read the parchment twice. Though it was short on specifics, the possibility of yet another northern threat was enough to make him grim. He summoned Tormund Giantsbane, who had become something of a figurehead for the free folk in this new era. Tormund scratched his thick beard, listening gravely. Then he said there were legends among his people of pale lights that called hunters off into the night, illusions of the tundra that led men to their deaths. Some said they were the spirits of those lost to the ice, seeking to lure others into a cold fate. Others believed they were flickers of hidden magic older than even the White Walkers. No one could say for certain. Tormund shrugged, concluding, if your fancy illusions didn't conjure it, then it's something else. I say we go have a look. Jon agreed. The next day, he sent word to Winterfell that he would take a small band of trusted free folk and rangers beyond the established camps toward the edges of the Frostfangs. He asked that if he did not return or send a raven within a fortnight, someone should come after them. Ever pragmatic, Jon gathered supplies for a 2-week journey and set out with Tormund, a handful of free folk, and a few members of the Night's Watch who had remained at Castle Black under the new peace. They parted ways with their calmer, settled kin, forging north into a land where only scattered rumors guided them. In Winterfell's Godwood, Bran watched the swirling interplay of illusions through his half-closed eyes. His connection to the weirwood trees let him sense events across Westeros, though it was always more art than science, more sensation than perfect clarity. He felt confident that the realm's illusions would remain stable in the south for now. No major conflict or deceit flared with enough intensity to trigger a wide-scale outbreak. But as he tried to extend his perception north of the wall, he found only silence, as though the land itself held its breath. Without dense weirwood groves, the old gods had little presence there. He could sense Jon's company only dimly, faint sparks of living minds on a white canvas. Sansa worried as the days passed, feeling that old fear for her half-brother or cousin, as the illusions had once clarified, though no one in the north truly questioned Jon's place in the Stark family. She occupied herself with the tasks of ruling, ensuring the roads were cleared of debris from the last snowfall, distributing seed to poor villages, and conferring with the lordly houses about how best to respond if anything monstrous did emerge from the far north. Yet each dusk, she would find herself pausing by the walls of Winterfell, gazing at the horizon as if expecting to see a raven. A week later, news arrived from the Riverlands. Edmure Tully was planning a grand harvest festival to commemorate the realm's newfound stability. He invited Sansa, as Lady of Winterfell, to attend. Envoys from the Westerlands, the Vale, and King's Landing were expected. The illusions made a sense of unity possible that had not existed for generations. Old grudges still smoldered, but no one wanted to risk fresh condemnation. Sansa was tempted by the invitation, saying it as a way to reinforce ties. Yet she hesitated, anxious about venturing south while Jon wandered in uncertain territory. Bran urged her to go, reminding her that if the illusions had taught them anything, it was that direct communication between houses was vital to preserving peace. Reluctantly, she agreed, but resolved to wait until word came from Jon. Dawn broke on the 10th day since Jon's departure, and still no raven had arrived. Sansa's nerves were stretched thin. Even for a dangerous foray beyond the Frostfangs, 10 days without word seemed long. She turned to Bran, who was seated near a small table in the solar, studying the old scrolls that the scholars from Old Town had left behind. When she expressed her concern, he closed his eyes, trying once more to peer into the far north through the current of the weirwoods. After several minutes, he opened them again, his voice heavy. I sense movement. Men walking under swirling lights. I can't see more. Their thoughts are muffled, as though something dampens the old god's sight. Sansa's heart quickened. Could the illusions themselves be reaching north? Or is it some other power interfering? I'm not certain, Bran admitted. I only know that Jon and his party are still alive. For now. She exhaled in relief that they lived. Then, with new resolve, she called for a cadre of northern riders and free folk scouts to prepare. Before she could commit to a search party, however, a sudden commotion erupted in Winterfell's courtyard. A raven soared in from the north, battered by the wind, nearly colliding with a guard on the battlements. Sansa rushed to the rookery, flanked by 2 guards, to receive the message. It was indeed from Jon, penned in a hasty scrawl. "We have encountered something neither living nor dead, a phenomenon of light and shadows. Men have vanished in the night, drawn away by whispered voices. We suspect a cluster of caves in the far foothills of the Frost Fangs. Tormund thinks it might be an old site of wildling worship or something worse. We press on carefully. If you do not hear from us in another 5 days, send aid." Sansa read the note aloud to the guard captain and then to Bran. The words sent a chill through everyone. In the old days, talk of neither living nor dead would have meant an invasion of whites, but the illusions had shown no sign of an undead resurgence. And yet, the notion of whispered voices luring men away seemed reminiscent of age-old northern legends half forgotten in the libraries of men. Sansa faced Bran, worry and determination mingling in her eyes. "We can't wait 5 days, not if men are vanishing." Bran considered this, his gaze distant. "We should muster a rescue party, but it must be carefully chosen. If Jon's note is correct, we might be dealing with a remnant of magic older than the illusions. Or something twisted by them. We can't simply march an army into the Frost Fangs." Sansa frowned. "Arya is away, likely off in Essos again. Our most experienced fighters and trackers are scattered. The Mormonts might offer skilled scouts, the Umbers too. We'll gather a small party. But we also need you, don't we? You see more than any of us." Bran hesitated. Even in the days of the White Walkers, he had seldom ventured physically into danger. His powers were most potent when rooted in a place with strong weirwood influence. Beyond the wall, that advantage dissipated. Yet he felt an urgency that would not relent. "Yes," he said. "I should go, for Jon's sake and for the sake of the realm. If something unnatural is stirring, it's my duty to understand it." Within a day, Winterfell mobilized a small expedition. Sansa was torn about leaving her seat, but ultimately decided her presence was needed in the north. She named a trusted steward to oversee local matters, called for Lady Ryswell to help guard the castle, and prepared to ride with Bran, a handful of trusted northern knights, and a group of free folk who knew the Frostfangs best. It was a modest band, around 50 in total. Too many might attract unwanted attention, too few might be overwhelmed. They loaded supplies, packed tents and furs, and set out into the brisk air. Bran rode in a specially crafted horse-drawn sledge, for the trails north would be too rough for an ordinary wheelchair. A hush of concern fell over Winterfell as they departed, an echo of the old days when every departure carried the weight of potential doom. Their journey was slow. Melted snow turned roads to mud, then the nights grew cold again, frosting ruts into jagged shapes. They stopped at scattered holdfasts along the Gift, collecting news from watchers who had heard rumors of the pale lights or lost travelers. Fear grew with each tale. Yet they pressed on, sending ravens behind them so that Winterfell might remain informed. After nearly a week, they crossed into the mountainous region where Jon's settlement crews had started to expand. The air felt thinner, every breath biting with an edge of frost. The illusions that had so profoundly shaped the southern politics of Westeros seemed very far away here. No flicker of half-forgotten war crimes or hidden betrayals disturbed their sleep at night, only an anxious sense that something else hovered just beyond mortal sight. They reached an outpost built around a ringfort of sharpened stakes. Free folk and a few black-clad rangers emerged to greet them, eyes wide at the sight of Sansa Stark herself venturing so far. One ranger approached, explaining that Jon and Tormund had indeed passed through about 8 days prior, heading deeper into the Frostfang foothills. They had not returned or sent further word. The ringfort's inhabitants had seen strange lights in the distance, a pale shimmer rising over the crest of a rocky slope. At times, they heard faint chanting on the wind, though no words could be made out. When they tried to investigate, they found no footprints, no firelight, nothing but silent peaks. That evening, Bran and Sansa consulted in a cramped wooden barracks. Bran allowed his mind to slip into a light trance, reaching as far as he could. He sensed Jon's presence somewhere to the northwest, a faint ember in a realm of whiteness. He could not see what surrounded him, but the ember was alive, not yet extinguished. Sansa stood by with arms folded, tension radiating from her every muscle. When Bran's eyes cleared, she pounced on the opportunity. "You still feel him?" "Yes," Bran said. "He's still there. I sense distress, but he hasn't been lost. They might be trapped or searching for answers. We have to press on." At dawn, their party set out, guided by the best trackers among the free folk. They traveled along ridges, forging higher into the rocky passes. The wind picked up, carrying icy gusts that cut like knives. Higher peaks loomed ahead, and the light took on a peculiar, silvery sheen even in broad day. On the second day out from the ring fort, they made camp in the lee of a stony outcrop. It was then that one of the scouts, a young free folk hunter named Ragna, came stumbling back from a brief foray, pale as new-fallen snow. "I saw it," she whispered, pressing a shaky hand to her face. A swirl in the sky, lights shifting, shimmering. And a voice. "I heard my brother calling me, though he's been dead 3 years." At that, a fearful quiet spread. Sansa exchanged a look with Bran, who seemed troubled in a way she'd rarely seen. He asked Ragna to describe the experience in detail. She told of a flicker in the corner of her eye, a swirl that glowed faintly, then blossomed into ribbons of pale blue and white light. She heard her brother's voice calling her name, urging her to follow. She had been mesmerized, almost stepping off a narrow ledge to her doom, when a sudden gust of wind tore the vision away. Somewhere in the back of Sansa's mind, she recalled hearing old northern bedtime stories that spoke of siren lights on the ice. Then she remembered Tormund's comment about legends among the free folk. Something about lights that lured travelers. But it all seemed so vague. She stepped away, letting others question Ragna while she conferred quietly with Bran. "This is no ordinary threat," she murmured. "Could it be the ghosts of the dead, or illusions forced upon us in the north?" Bran's eyes flickered. "It doesn't feel like the illusions we know. Those illusions reveal truths, hidden sins, secrets. This phenomenon seems different, more primal. It doesn't unmask old crimes. It tempts, it calls. Almost like it's feeding on something in people's minds." Sansa shivered, though the wind wasn't the sole cause. If it calls to our grief or regret, it might lure men to their deaths. No wonder there are no footprints leading away. They might follow the lights into some cavern or crevasse. Could that be what happened to Jon's men? Bran's silence confirmed her fear. That night, the campsite was tense. Guards doubled. The free folk among them tightened their circles, telling hushed stories of the things that dwelled beyond the known wilds. Little sleep was had. Occasionally, Sansa thought she saw a flicker of something pale above the ridge, but it might have been the moonlight on a patch of snow. Either way, she kept a hand on the hilt of the dagger she wore, a gesture reminiscent of her sister Arya, though Sansa had never been so skilled with blades. At last, in the early hours before dawn, one of the sentries saw a faint orange glow in the distance, as if from a campfire or torches. Their group scrambled to investigate. Working their way up a jagged pass, they found signs of old footprints partially drifted over by snow. One track seemed larger, possibly from Tormund. Hope stirred. They pressed on, picking a careful path until they spotted a cluster of small fires burning in a shallow ravine. Drawing close, they discovered half a dozen men huddled around the embers, their faces bleak. Sansa recognized a few as free folk who had left with Jon. One had an arrow through his thigh, bandaged crudely. The men jerked upright at the sight of newcomers, then sagged in relief when they recognized the wolf sigil and a glimpse of Bran's face. "Sansa," one gasped. "And the boy in the chair, they said you were the Greenseer." He spoke with awe, but it was overshadowed by exhaustion and fear. They asked at once about Jon. The men explained that Jon and Tormund had gone deeper into the foothills to search for several rangers who vanished in the night. The men around the fire had been told to hold position in case the missing returned. But after days, none came. They had glimpsed horrifying illusions of lost loved ones floating among shimmering lights. One of them confessed he nearly walked off a cliff because he thought he saw his wife's face among the pale ribbons of light. "She died 2 winters ago," he said quietly, tears freezing on his cheeks. Bran inhaled, letting the quiet pulse of the land fill him. Here, the weirwood network was too faint to guide him well, but he could sense that a powerful force dwelled nearby, something that echoed the illusion's capacity to shape images in the mind. But these visions felt born of longing, not truth. The illusions that men had endured across Westeros always showed the real past, no matter how grim. These lights, in contrast, conjured illusions of the dead beckoning from beyond. It was not the old god's memory. It felt hungrier, more predatory. One of the free folk trackers who'd accompanied Sansa's group declared that he knew of caves in the higher slopes, rumored to be inhabited by shadowy practitioners of ancient magic, though he'd never seen them himself. He offered to lead the way. Sansa, with brisk resolve, ordered that half of their party remain to tend the wounded and keep watch. She, Bran, and the rest would ascend the ravine. The men who had served under Jon insisted on accompanying them, despite their weariness, determined to find their lost commander. By midday, they climbed a steep slope strewn with jagged rocks. The wind howled, carrying flecks of snow that stung the skin. Their progress was laborious. but eventually the tracker led them to a narrow crack in the mountainside. It opened onto a ledge that overlooked a dizzying drop, but from there the crack widened again, revealing an entrance to a hidden cave network. A faint glow emanated from within, not quite the warm gold of torches, but something paler, unearthly. Sansa swallowed, feeling her heart pound. Bran, seated in his sledge, looked calm, though a fine layer of frost clung to his eyelashes. She exchanged a glance with him. Neither needed words to understand the risk. This was likely the place. The Free Folk tracker lit a torch, then moved forward with caution, beckoning them into the cave. The group advanced, blades drawn or bows at the ready. Even the slightest noise seemed amplified by the echoing walls, water dripping, boots scraping stone, the whisper of fearful breath. At first, it was darkness lit only by the flicker of torches. But then the passages widened, and they saw the flickering glow that Ragna had described, soft ribbons of light dancing along the rock walls, as if cast by unseen prisms. It was unsettlingly beautiful, mesmerizing enough that a few men paused, forgetting to keep their guard. Sansa had to tear her gaze away, forcibly reminding herself they were searching for Jon and Tormund. They soon found evidence they were on the right track. A broken arrow marked the path, lodged in the rocky floor. Then a scrap of black cloth that might have been torn from a night's watch cloak. The lights intensified, drifting closer, almost like living things. Once or twice Sansa thought she saw a face in their patterns, a face from memory, her mother perhaps, or Robb. She shook her head, forcing the illusion away. This was no gentle reminder of the past. It was something else trying to slip into her mind. Bran tensed in his sledge. She placed a hand on his shoulder. "What do you sense?" she whispered. He murmured back, "Pain and longing, and a presence that feeds on it. Be careful. It can pluck the memories you hold dear, use them to lure you." She nodded grimly, pressing forward. Two Free Folk trackers flanked her, scanning the twisting tunnel. At last, they emerged into a larger cavern with a ceiling so high it vanished in the dancing lights. The air felt colder here, yet somehow also heavier, as though it vibrated with hidden energy. Stalactites dripped frozen droplets, forming icicles that caught and refracted the pale glow. In the center of the cavern lay a cluster of figures. Men stretched out on the stone, unmoving. Fear clutched Sansa as she rushed closer, ignoring the cautioning hands of her companions. She quickly saw that these men were breathing, though shallowly, as if in a trance. Among them were two Free Folk, a ranger, and, her heart lurched, Tormund Giantsbane himself sprawled on his side. She dropped to her knees beside him, shaking him gently. His eyes were half open, pupils dilated, and he mumbled incoherently about a woman of the ice calling to him. Sansa looked around desperately. There was no sign of Jon among these collapsed forms. Bran's voice echoed behind her. "We have to wake them. The illusions hold them in thrall." One of the men in the group tried splashing water on the nearest fallen figure. Another reached for Tormund, patting his cheeks, trying to snap him from the trance. Slowly, Tormund stirred, blinking in confusion. He looked around as though emerging from a terrible dream. "Where?" he rasped. "Jon." Jon followed them. He said he saw someone. Gods, it was all so bright. Sansa bent lower. "Where did Jon go?" Tormund's eyes filled with alarm. He pointed a shaking finger toward a narrow passage that branched off to the left. "He went that way. The lights, they took the shape of his father, Ned Stark." He was calling Jon's name. Jon thought it might be an illusion or a message. He insisted on going alone, told me to stay behind with the men who'd fallen under the spell. But I couldn't stay awake. I tried, but the voice got in my head. Sansa clenched her jaw, then turned to the knights and Free Folk who stood behind her. "Help these men. Warm them. Try to keep them from slipping under again." She looked at Bran. "We have to find Jon." Bran nodded, though he looked paler than usual. "I'll come with you. This presence, it feels stronger in there." They advanced into the left-hand passage. The closer they came, the more intensely the lights flickered around them, shifting in color from pale blue to ghostly white, sometimes merging into swirling patterns. And with that shifting came faint echoes of voices, as if the air was filled with memories plucked from 100 minds. Sansa heard her mother's laugh, then the distant cry of Rickon as a child, then the voice of Joffrey snarling curses. She winced, trying to shut it out. One of her guards swore he heard his dead sister singing a lullaby. Another reeled against the wall, nearly dropping his torch when he glimpsed a blood-stained form he later claimed was King Stannis, for reasons unknown. Each man or woman saw something personal, something that rattled them. Bran shuddered in the sledge. His eyes rolled back as though under tremendous psychic strain. Sansa grabbed his hand. "Stay with me," she whispered. "We'll get through." They continued, step by step, until the passage opened onto a smaller chamber. There, kneeling on the frozen ground, was Jon Snow. His sword lay to one side, half buried in a thin layer of ice. He seemed transfixed by a column of shimmering light that stretched from floor to ceiling like a pillar of moonlit fog. In that pillar, Sansa discerned a shape, a face that resembled Ned Stark. Beard, noble features, kind eyes. It was heartbreakingly precise. Even she felt a surge of emotion at seeing that face again. Jon's lips moved soundlessly, as if he were conversing with it. Sansa felt tears gathering in her eyes unbidden. But something about the face was wrong. Like looking into a mirror that was rippling. She forced herself to focus on the rest of the chamber. At the edges, lumps of ice formed strange designs, almost like runes. The faint hum of power filled the air, oppressive yet delicate. She realized this was likely an ancient site of magic, older than the wall itself. The illusions in the south revealed truth, but this was a place that shaped illusions of longing, or perhaps illusions stolen from men's hearts. One of the free folk behind Sansa murmured in awe, "Gods, that's Eddard Stark," but she forced herself not to believe it. She saw the subtle flickers in the figure's features, the way Ned's face seemed to shift into someone else for a moment. Maybe a childlike expression that Ned had never worn. This was not him. She moved forward carefully, calling softly, "Jon, Jon, can you hear me? Look at me." He did not react. The figure of Ned Stark in the pillar of light shifted its gaze toward Sansa. His mouth curled into a gentle half-smile, reminiscent of the father she remembered. Sansa's throat constricted. It took every ounce of will not to kneel in front of that face and beg for comfort. But she stepped closer, determined, and placed a hand on Jon's shoulder. "Jon, wake up. It's not him. You know it's not." Jon blinked, shuddering as though from a trance. His eyes were moist. Slowly, he looked at Sansa, recognition dawning. "Sansa," I heard him. He said he was proud of me, that he forgave me. He called me his son. Sansa's heart squeezed painfully. "I know," she said, voice trembling. "But you have to see the truth. Whatever you heard, it's not real." Jon exhaled a ragged breath. Then he turned back to the illusion, anguish twisting his features. "I wanted it to be real so badly. I wanted to believe I could say farewell." His voice broke on the last word. Sansa squeezed his shoulder gently. The illusions in the south had revealed that Jon was not Ned's son by birth, but the child of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark. Ned's quiet acceptance of that secret had weighed on Jon for years. The longing for Ned's approval, for a father's love, still lingered in him. The figure of Ned extended a hand through the pillar of light. Sansa felt a wave of longing, as if the air itself crackled with desire. If Jon touched it, she sensed it might take him wholly, lead him deeper into this magical labyrinth until he was lost forever. She inhaled sharply, then made a decision. Stepping between Jon and the pillar, she locked eyes with this false Ned Stark. With her voice steady, she said, "You are not him. Let him go." The figure's expression twisted, the corners of Ned's mouth turning down in an almost predatory anger. The pillar flared brighter, forcing Sansa to shield her face with her forearm. A gust of icy wind tore through the chamber. Bran cried out, reeling in his sledge as though something struck his mind. The free folk and knights behind them clutched at the walls or each other, curses lost in the howl of wind. Sansa gritted her teeth. She remembered every lesson in composure she had learned from Cersei, from Littlefinger, from Marjorie Tyrell, from Daenerys. She had long since surpassed them in her own quiet resilience. "We will not be taken by lies," she said. "Show your true face." The light flickered as if uncertain. Then it dimmed, swirling in upon itself. A shape emerged, vaguely humanoid, made of ghostly luminescence. Its visage seemed to shift through a dozen forms in an instant, an old woman, a young child, a knight, a grotesque half-human shape, each flickering away before it solidified. Jon stared in shock. Sansa clung to his arm, determined not to lose him. This presence had no stable identity, it was feeding on their memories, wearing illusions like masks. Bran, fighting the mental assault, managed to straighten. His voice rang out, quivering with both fear and authority. "Begone! You do not belong among our living forms." He lifted one trembling hand, and for a moment Sansa saw his eyes roll back again. She felt a surge of energy in the air, something akin to the illusions of the South, but shaped by Bran's will. The presence hissed, a sound that crackled along every nerve. The cavern trembled, small shards of ice falling from above. In that clash of forces, the shimmering entity let out a final shriek, then collapsed into scattered motes of light that vanished among the stalactites. Silence followed, broken only by panting breaths. Slowly, the ribbons of pale glow receded from the cavern, leaving behind the dull flicker of their torches. Jon sank to his knees, shoulders trembling. Sansa knelt beside him, pressing her brow to his, relief overwhelming her. He clasped her in a fierce hug, as though anchoring himself to reality. Bran exhaled unsteadily, the tension draining from his limbs. The free folk and knights who had managed to stay upright helped each other, checking for injuries. One by one, they gathered, quiet awe on their faces. No one truly understood what had just happened, only that Bran had somehow banished whatever creature or force lurked in that pillar of light. Had it been a spirit? A shard of ancient magic? Perhaps a leftover echo from the centuries before the first men's pact with the children of the forest. None could say with certainty. The illusions that the old gods conjured in the South forced men to face truths of their deeds. This phenomenon had been something else, an exploitation of longing, an illusion that lured men to their doom by promising what they craved most. They found no other living souls in the chamber. If some had been led further in, they were gone. Sansa didn't want to think about the possibility that they had become part of that swirling magic, lost to the realm of illusions forever. All they could do was return to the group they had left in the larger cavern and tend to the survivors. Those men slowly regained consciousness once the entity was driven off. Many wept, describing sweet reunions with lost loved ones that felt so tangible it pained them to let go. Tormund cursed the illusions, vowing to kill them if they ever tried to seduce him again, though a haunted look lingered behind his bravado. Jon, now fully alert, questioned Tormund about how they first encountered these lights. Tormund admitted that they had followed rumors, stumbling upon a faint glow at night. Then the illusions grew stronger, leading them deeper and deeper. Jon's face was drawn with guilt as he recounted how he lost some men who followed illusions of wives or children. Sansa squeezed his hand. At least he was safe now. Bran seemed exhausted but calm, explaining that their best course was to leave this place as soon as possible. Without the entity's presence, the illusions in these caves should fade. But he warned them to stay vigilant, for it might return if it managed to gather strength elsewhere. Or perhaps it was destroyed completely. They had no way of knowing. Despite the gnawing uncertainty, the group prepared to retreat from the hidden caverns, carrying their wounded and the half-conscious men. Though they moved slowly, the sense of relief was palpable. When they emerged into the open air, the afternoon sun was a welcome sight, though it offered little warmth. Many of the survivors shielded their eyes, as if they had been in darkness for weeks. Slowly, they trekked back to rejoin the ones who had remained at the ravine camp. Everyone was stunned to see them alive, and even more stunned when they heard about the illusions that took on the shapes of loved ones. Tormund repeated the story to a circle of free folk who spat and muttered, calling the force a false spirit of the damned. Some claimed it was an old legend come to life. Others merely shook their heads. They rested for a full day, caring for the wounded, while Jon and Sansa conferred in hushed voices. Bran sat nearby, silent as a statue. When asked for guidance, he simply said that he felt the threat had receded. Whatever was in that cavern had been feeding on sorrow and longing, weaving illusions from the hearts of men. Now that it had been confronted and banished, the lure should be broken. Jon proposed that they set guards or place warning signs around the area, ensuring no one ventured there again. Sansa concurred. The free folk grudgingly agreed, though many insisted no one in their right mind would ever come to that accursed place. With that decided, everyone prepared to leave these haunted slopes as soon as possible. The journey back south was slower, burdened by the injured. Jon and Tormund rode at the front of the column, ensuring safe passage across the ridges. Sansa traveled at Bran's side, providing him with blankets and gentle conversation when the nights grew cold. She noticed how drained he seemed, as though battling that force had cost him dearly. He assured her he would recover. Yet she could sense a quiet wariness in him, a realization that illusions, whether conjured by the old gods or by other powers, were not as simple as revealing truth. There could be illusions that exploited men's deepest yearnings without offering any moral lesson. Jon, too, seemed changed. Though he had faced the Night King's armies before, this encounter rattled him in a different way. Once, illusions had revealed the secret of his parentage, the truth that Eddard Stark had raised him out of love and duty to Lyanna. That truth, painful though it was, had given him closure and a sense of identity. Now he had faced an illusion that pretended to give him what he wanted most, a moment of paternal absolution from the man he still considered his father. He confessed to Sansa that part of him wished to remain in that cave forever if it meant feeling Ned's presence again. And that frightened him more than any white or dragon. Sansa understood all too well. She had glimpsed her mother's face for only an instant. Had it lasted longer, she was not certain she would have resisted. Perhaps that was the deeper terror, illusions that could offer love without the burden of truth. They made it back to the ring fort at the edge of the Frost Fangs, where they were greeted like returning heroes. The men who had been enthralled by the lights recovered slowly, many suffering nightmares that mingled images of lost loved ones with the swirling ribbons of ghostly luminance. Word was sent to the free folk settlements along the northern frontiers, warning them to avoid the caverns in the high slopes. Jon requested that if any further sightings of those pale lights occurred, ravens be dispatched at once. He had no desire to see more people fall prey to illusions that drained their will and left them lost in false comfort. A sense of relief permeated the group as they traveled farther south, leaving the cursed foothills behind. Their last stop before returning to Winterfell was Castle Black, where a skeleton crew of Black brothers welcomed them. Ghost, Jon's dire wolf, bounded out to greet them with a subdued joy. Jon cradled the wolf's head, burying his face in Ghost's thick white fur. It was a moment of pure, unguarded relief. Sansa and Bran exchanged a small smile. Castle Black, they spent 2 nights. Sansa asked Jon whether he meant to remain here or continue leading the free folk in the gift. He shook his head, explaining that he felt it was time to return to Winterfell, at least for a while. Tormund, though, planned to remain near the wall, ensuring none of his people wandered too far north and stumbled onto more nightmares. With a final clasp of forearms and a few good-natured jests, Tormund and Jon parted ways. Tormund looked at Bran with new respect, gruffly thanking him for banishing the monster that dared prey on them. Bran only nodded. Under gray skies, the party set out for Winterfell. The illusions of the south had not reached this far, but the events in the Frostfangs had shown that illusions existed in many forms. Bran, introspective, mulled the idea that the realm of memory and dream was vast, and the old gods were not the only forces that roamed within it. Sansa quietly wondered how this experience might ripple through their broader struggle for honesty and stability. If illusions could be used to lure and devour, might there be other pockets of dark magic in Westeros capable of twisting men's minds? Upon arriving at Winterfell, they were met with cheers and tears of relief. Sansa tried to quell the fuss, focusing instead on distributing the men to the maesters and healers. Jon accompanied them, ensuring that every survivor received proper attention. Bran was whisked to a warm chamber where hot water and blankets awaited him, though he insisted he was more tired in spirit than in flesh. As word spread of their return, the atmosphere in Winterfell eased. They were home, and a threat that might have spilled south had been stifled. Over the next few days, the illusions in the south reasserted themselves in the daily letters and ravens that arrived. Lords wrote to Sansa, discussing matters as varied as border disputes and trade caravans. None had encountered illusions like the ones that dwelled in the Frostfang caves. Instead, they continued to wrestle with the aftermath of the illusions that revealed old crimes. House Lannister had cracked down on minor lords who resisted the new order. The Targaryen queen supervised reconstruction in King's Landing, and the Vale prepared for a new festival. In all corners of Westeros, people seemed both fascinated and wary of illusions, uncertain whether to fear them or embrace them as instruments of justice. Sansa listened to these accounts while seated near Bran, who stared at the flames of the hearth with an enigmatic calm. She sensed that he was changed. For so long, he had been the conduit for illusions tied to the old gods, illusions of truth that forced men to acknowledge their past deeds. Now he had encountered illusions of a different nature, ones that offered not truth but false solace. Perhaps that made him wary of his own power, or perhaps it simply broadened his understanding of the hidden realms. She asked him once if he feared the illusions he channeled might be corrupted in similar ways. He answered softly, "The illusions that come from the Weirwood network are anchored in memory, actual events that shaped our history. They don't conjure fantasies or exploit longing, they reveal what was." I believe that difference is crucial, but I also suspect many men can't tell them apart. They only see illusions and it scares them. Or tempts them. She nodded, feeling a pang of empathy for those who had fallen to the false illusions in the Frost Fangs. "Will you try to warn the realm about these other illusions?" she asked. "Or was that sight unique?" Bran gazed into the fire. "I can't be sure. The world is old and pockets of magic remain. The illusions shaped by the old gods are woven throughout the entire realm, but I suspect there are other forces too, echoes of sorcery from the Age of Heroes, from the children, from the vanished empire of the dawn. We live in a tapestry woven by many hands, not all benevolent." He paused, voice turning quieter. "I will send guidance to those who ask. But we can't patrol every cave and every hidden corner of the mountains. We can only remain vigilant." Sansa considered that. The illusions of truth had reshaped politics and forced confessions. But illusions of hunger, illusions that preyed on sorrow, might be equally powerful in a darker sense. That knowledge weighed on her, reminding her that their victory over falsehood was never absolute. Still, she took heart in the fact that they had rescued Jon and the others, preventing that dark force from growing. In that, she found a reason to persevere. Days turned to weeks as winter's hold gradually receded from the north. News of the strange events beyond the Frostfangs trickled south, though few outside the north seemed truly alarmed. They had grown accustomed to illusions as instruments of moral reckoning, not as threats in themselves. A few maesters in Old Town wrote inquiries to Winterfell requesting more details. Sansa and Jon chose to keep their responses vague, concerned that panic or curiosity might lead more fools to seek out the phenomenon. Even a handful of the southern lords asked whether the illusions had changed in nature, if they were now conjuring visions of the dead. Jon kept his counsel. He was not eager to discuss how close he'd come to losing himself in that false reunion with Ned Stark. Amid these tensions, invitations began arriving for Edmure Tully's harvest festival in the Riverlands. Sansa had intended to attend weeks ago, but the mission north had delayed her. Now Edmure's letters grew more insistent, describing how the illusions in the Riverlands had quieted significantly. Lords who once opposed him were now cooperating, partly out of fear that any hidden treachery would be exposed by illusions. He hoped the festival might cement a sense of unity. Sansa saw an opportunity to affirm the North's ties to its Tully kin. She confided in Jon, who agreed that forging stronger bonds across Westeros was wise. After everything they had confronted, the realm needed reassurance that the lines of alliance were still strong. Thus, Sansa prepared to travel south once more, this time accompanied by Jon. Bran, who had rarely left Winterfell after the Council of Truth, decided to remain behind. Though physically he could handle the journey, he sensed that his presence was more needed in the north, observing, guiding illusions where necessary, and continuing his quiet watch on the far frontiers. He no longer believed the force in the Frostfangs would reawaken soon, but he did not want to leave the region unguarded. So Sansa and Jon gathered a modest entourage of northern knights, free folk representatives, and a small retinue of servants. The day they set out, the sky was clear, the sun bright, as if nature itself offered a blessing upon their travels. Riding side by side, Sansa and Jon spoke of their father, both of them acknowledging how painful the illusions beyond the wall had been. Sansa confided that she had glimpsed her mother's face. Jon listened intently, offering the quiet solidarity he had once shown her so long ago. It was a comfort for them both to share these burdens. Some days, they discussed the illusions that had reshaped Westeros's entire political landscape. Other times, they rode in silence, content with the calm of each other's company. They reached Moat Cailin, then pressed on into the neck, and soon the landscape turned from rugged hills to gentler plains. The illusions, they knew, had become a normal part of life in these lands. People spoke openly of old crimes laid bare, of lords who had confessed wrongdoing rather than endure nightly hauntings. Commerce thrived as petty wars had largely subsided. Yet the illusions did not vanish entirely. Occasionally, a traveling bard would mention seeing the shade of Walder Frey or hearing the echo of the Red Wedding's violins in the wind, a reminder that the realm would not soon forget such treachery. But these illusions seemed less frequent and less intense, perhaps because men had grown more forthright, or perhaps because the realm was simply exhausted by constant revelations. Sansa and Jon passed scattered towns that greeted them warmly. The presence of a Stark was an event these days. Folk clamored to catch a glimpse of Lady Sansa, the gracious ruler, and Jon Snow, the hero who had helped defeat the Night King. Some offered them bread and salt, blessings from the Seven or from the old gods, depending on local customs. They traveled unmolested, encountering only the typical complaints of bandits or wolves near the roads, nothing that required illusions to sort out. At last, they arrived in the Riverlands, where Edmure Tully welcomed them at Riverrun. The castle bustled with preparations for the festival, tables laden with fresh produce, casks of ale, ribbons of bright colors hung from the walls. Edmure greeted his niece with a hearty embrace, relief written plainly on his face. He exchanged respectful words with Jon, acknowledging him as part of the family. The illusions had once revealed the truth of Jon's parentage, but to Edmure and many in the north, he was still as much a Stark as any child raised in Winterfell. As other guests arrived, Sansa noted a decidedly more hopeful atmosphere than the last time she had been here for the Council of Truth. That event had been charged with tension as houses confronted the past crimes of the Lannisters. Now, the realm had begun to find a steadier footing. Among those in attendance were lords from the Westerlands, carefully mentioning how Jaime Lannister had enacted further reforms. Representatives from the Vale spoke of improvements in governance since illusions had exposed Baelish's manipulations. From King's Landing arrived a small envoy carrying Daenerys's personal message of goodwill. She herself was tied up with pressing matters in the capital but sent gifts of spices and fine cloth for the festival. Sansa could not help but sense that, in many ways, the illusions had nudged Westeros toward a more cooperative future, albeit one still fragile. During the festival, the illusions made only a subtle appearance. One evening, as minstrels played by torchlight in the courtyard, a faint shape flickered at the edge of the crowd. Some claimed it looked like a knight from the War of the Nine Penny Kings, others thought it was a ghost from Robert's Rebellion. Whatever it was, it vanished without caw. Sing an uproar. Most folk carried on with the music, merely shrugging at the sight. The illusions had become an accepted part of the realm's tapestry, neither revered nor universally feared, but understood as watchers from the past, ready to demand honesty when needed. Edmure made a toast, praising the newfound unity. He thanked the Starks for their unwavering stance on truth and justice. He also thanked the Lannisters, albeit in measured terms, for acknowledging their wrongs. He assured everyone that the Riverlands would remain a safe heart of Westeros, open to all who came in peace. Applause followed, along with clinking goblets. Sansa's gaze drifted to Jon, who sat with the northern retinue, offering a faint smile that seemed tinged with memories of the illusions up north. She knew his thoughts turned often to the face he had seen in that cave, the father he had idolized, even though Ned was not his father by blood. She prayed that the illusions of longing would not haunt him forever. After the festival concluded, Sansa and Jon lingered at Riverrun a few more days, discussing trade pacts and exploring ways to fortify the roads between the north and the Riverlands. In the quiet hours, Sansa walked along the ramparts with Jon, recalling how the illusions had once shown her father's final moments in King's Landing, or how they had laid bare the Lannisters' cruelty. Now it was as if the realm had stepped beyond that immediate wave of revelations, learning to shape a more transparent governance. Yet the illusions remained a constant undercurrent. They had proven that any fresh treachery would be exposed, preventing would-be tyrants from rewriting history at will. And if other illusions, darker illusions, lurked in hidden places, well, that was a separate battle, perhaps requiring vigilance of a different kind. When they finally took their leave of Riverrun, they did so amid well wishes. Edmure accompanied them a short distance on horseback, promising to visit Winterfell next season. The roads were not as muddy as before, and the journey north felt lighter somehow. Jon commented that it was good to see the land at peace. Sansa agreed, privately marveling at how far they had come since the days of the War of the Five Kings and the terror of the White Walkers. The illusions had not created this peace single-handedly. Countless sacrifices, alliances, and personal transformations had led them here. But the illusions had been a catalyst, ensuring that no one could hide behind gold or cruelty without eventually facing the truth. They reached Winterfell to find Bran in the Godwood, as usual. He greeted them with the same cool composure that had become second nature to him, though a hint of relief warmed his expression. In the privacy of the Solar, they shared news of the festival, the calm that seemed to blanket the realm. Bran nodded, revealing that in their absence he had sensed no surge of illusions akin to what they had witnessed in the Frost Fangs. Perhaps that strange pocket of magic had been neutralized. Yet he reminded them that caution was ever needed. The illusions in the south were stable for now, but the future was unwritten. Sansa took a seat by the hearth, her limbs weary from travel. "Do you think the illusions that reveal truth will ever fade entirely?" she asked. "If we continue on this path, governing openly, punishing wrongdoing, might they no longer be necessary?" Bran studied the flicker of flames, as though he could read the realm's destiny in the shifting shadows. They might diminish in frequency, become less of a nightly terror and more of an occasional reminder. But men are flawed. New lies will arise, new betrayals. As long as there is deception, the illusions will find a way. That's their purpose. Jon, standing by the window, absorbed that in thoughtful silence. Eventually, he spoke. "That might be for the best. Even now, I see how the illusions have shaped Lord's behavior. They know they can't simply hush up a scandal or bury a secret. They must face it. It's made the realm more honest, if not perfectly so." Sansa nodded, remembering how swiftly House Lannister had been forced to atone once the illusions began. "At least it spares us another generation of Tywin Lannisters, forging alliances in the dark," she said dryly. Jon allowed himself a small smile. Then his gaze drifted inward. "There's something I realized up north, when I heard that false voice of Ned Stark. In a way, the illusions of the old gods gave us the truth about my parentage, but that never changed how I feel about Ned. He was still my father in every way that matters. And while the illusions can expose secrets, they can't sever bonds formed by love." Sansa reached across and touched his arm gently. "Yes," she said, "that's something no magic can take away." A peaceful hush settled over them, broken only by the soft crackle of the fire. They had journeyed through nightmares and revelations, fought wars and illusions alike, yet they had emerged with something stronger than hatred or fear, an unbreakable bond, a loyalty to one another that had survived every test. In that moment, they felt the stirring of hope not just for themselves, but for Westeros. Life returned to routine in Winterfell, the daily chores of governance, the watchful eye upon the roads, the quiet vigil for any sign of the illusions changing. Ravens came and went with news of small disputes or border feuds, but nothing that threatened the fragile peace. Jaime Lannister wrote once to confirm that House Lannister was abiding by the restitution agreements, even assisting in a new program to provide farmland to small folk who had lost everything in the war. Tyrion added a postscript, a droll remark about how illusions haunted him less often these days, though he suspected they would never fully vanish. He ended by inviting the Starks to visit King's Landing again when they could, to witness the city's ongoing transformation under Daenerys' reign. But for now, Sansa remained content in the north, ensuring that her people thrived in the gentler spring. Jon, too, found a measure of peace, though he still occasionally traveled to the Gift, coordinating with Tormund and the Free Folk. Bran continued his quiet meditations in the Godswood, drifting deeper into the mysteries of the Weirwood network, yet no longer burdened by the same sense of isolation. He had faced illusions that did not belong to the old gods, illusions of a darker nature. That experience reminded him that he was still mortal, still a Stark, and that the fight for a just realm extended beyond the South's revelations of past crimes. The illusions that revealed truth were a mighty tool, but only men and women themselves could decide how to act upon that truth, and how to resist the lure of illusions that offered false comfort. Summer inched ever closer, with each day a little longer, each night a bit warmer. Farmers in the north planted new seeds, forging alliances with southern merchants for goods that rarely reached this far. Wolves occasionally prowled the forests, but no monstrous threat emerged from beyond the wall. The illusions of the south persisted, yet they felt almost benevolent now, limited to fleeting glimpses of old regrets or subtle nudges that kept lords honest. In rare cases, A fresh scandal ignited a sudden surge of illusions in some corner of the realm, like a local tyrant in the Westerlands who had tried to starve peasants, only to be unmasked by the nighttime apparitions. Stories like that spread quickly, reaffirming that the illusions still had teeth when necessary. One evening, after the sun set in a blaze of pink and gold over the walls of Winterfell, Sansa walked alone among the castle's ramparts. She glanced down into the courtyard, where torches flickered and the last of the servants bustled about. A cool breeze caressed her cheek, carrying the scent of distant pines. She paused at a crenellation, thinking of how far she had come from the naive girl who once dreamed of southern courts. The illusions had revealed so many bitter truths over the years, some of which involved her own mistakes in trusting Cersei or failing to see Peter Baelish's manipulations. She had confronted each one, grown from them, and emerged as Lady of Winterfell with a steady hand. A faint rustle behind her announced Jon's presence. He joined her at the wall, gazing over the same expanse of twilight. They stood in comfortable silence until he spoke quietly. "Do you ever wonder if our parents, our real parents, can see us now? If they'd be proud of what we've done with the North, with the realm?" Her chest tightened at the echo of the illusions that haunted them both, but she found a gentle smile. "I do. I like to think my mother watches over me still, and that Ned Stark, whether or not he was your father by blood, looks upon you with pride." The illusions we faced beyond the wall twisted that longing, but it doesn't invalidate the love we feel or the gratitude for what they taught us. Jon's eyes reflected the torchlight as he nodded. "Sometimes I still dream of him, the way he'd stand in the courtyard watching me spar with Robb. Then I wake, and for a moment, I want to cling to that dream forever." "I know," Sansa said softly, "but the illusions in the south gave us a different kind of dream, one anchored in truth, forcing us to see the realm's deceptions. That sort of honesty might have its own comfort, in a way." Jon leaned over the wall, scanning the horizon. "The realm is changing. Maybe we're closer to what Ned always wanted. A place where men can keep their oaths, and justice doesn't depend on the whim of a lord or the cunning of a schemer." Sansa placed a hand on his shoulder. "We still have far to go, but we've taken the first steps." She glanced upward, where the stars began to shimmer in a velvet sky. Sometimes she half expected illusions to appear there, replaying the tragedies that befell House Stark. But no illusions came. The North was at peace for now, and the Weirwood network didn't summon ghosts unless secrets demanded it. As they turned to go back inside, Sansa felt a surge of gratitude for the quiet that had descended on Winterfell. They had faced illusions of truth and illusions of hunger, survived wars and watched the realm transform. Where it would go from here, no one could say with certainty. But for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe that they had forged a measure of stability, a chance for new generations to grow without the constant shadow of unmasked lies or beckoning phantoms. The illusions that Bran had unleashed would continue as long as men lied, but perhaps those lies would be fewer and less devastating. Perhaps one day, illusions of truth would become merely stories told to teach children that honesty was the best shield against the realm's ancient watchful powers. In the Godswood, Bran stared into the heart tree's carved face, hearing the faint rustle of leaves. The old gods did not speak in words, but he felt their presence, patient and immeasurably old. Through his mind flickered images of wars ended, secrets revealed, men who atoned, and men who perished because they refused. He saw flickers of some future time, though never clearly, just glimpses of a realm shaped by these illusions and guided by the memory of countless generations. A realm perhaps not free of strife, but free of the worst deceptions. He let out a slow breath, letting peace wash over him. And so, in that hush of a northern spring, the realm continued. The illusions had done what many armies could not: force an enduring introspection among rulers and subjects alike. House Lannister's lies were laid bare, and though other houses had faced their own reckoning, they too had adapted. Daenerys Targaryen balanced her bloodline's legacy of dragonfire with a new desire for transparency and fairness. The Vale, the Reach, the Stormlands, and Dorne found new rhythms of governance, aware that illusions would cast light on any hypocrisy. The North stood as a testament to resilience, where the Starks, survivors of heartbreak, betrayals, and near extinction, had grown into wise stewards for a world reborn. In time, historians would say that Bran Stark, the three-eyed raven, had woven illusions through the weirwoods to cleanse the realm of falsehoods. Others would argue that the illusions emerged naturally from the old god's domain, and Bran merely shepherded them. Countless songs would commemorate the day the Lannisters were forced to confess to all their dark deeds, and later, the day a monstrous illusion in the Frost Fangs was undone by the combined courage of Starks and Free Folk. Some would hold these illusions in reverence, seeing them as the realm's moral compass. Others would curse them, lamenting that no secret could remain hidden. Yet all would agree that they had changed Westeros in ways that no one could have foreseen in the days of Robert's rebellion. Each year, new events tested that fragile honesty. Disputes arose, border clashes erupted, and occasionally someone tried to hide a murder or theft. Invariably, illusions manifested, showing the guilty as though lit by an otherworldly lantern. And so the realm moved forward, guided by memory shaped by truths that no gold or power could bury. Through it all, House Stark stood firm, remembering the countless sacrifices that led to this vigil of perpetual accountability. Summer's warmth settled over the north at last, an occurrence so rare that children ran barefoot in the courtyards, marveling at the sunshine. One quiet evening, as the castle's folk dined in the great hall, a handful of crows glided into Winterfell's yard, perching on the walls as though drawn by some instinct. Bran, noticing them through a window, felt the weirwood network stir. No crisis accompanied the crows' arrival, no urgent illusions manifested. They simply observed in that inscrutable avian manner, black eyes reflecting the amber glow of torchlight. Standing by Bran's chair, Sansa asked if he sensed anything amiss. He shook his head. They're watchers, just like the illusions. Perhaps they come to remind us that the old gods are always watching, even in times of calm. She smiled, setting a gentle hand on his arm. Let them watch then. We have nothing to hide. Below them, the crows flapped their wings in the dimming light, silent sentinels in a land that had learned to live under the gaze of unblinking truth. The illusions continued to breathe through the tapestry of Westeros, but now with a more measured cadence. No longer an unstoppable storm, but a guiding wind that whistled through every tower and croft. And in that gentle hush of a summer evening, beneath the watchful crows and the steadfast heart tree, the Stark family found a measure of peace, certain that whatever illusions the future held, they would face them together, unafraid of truths that once would have shattered them. For the realm had survived, the illusions had revealed and chastened, and in the end, truth, like the North, always endured.